This is a work of complete cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. I hope you're happy now. His wife left after his affair, then the Mafia boss's perfect life fell apart. He didn't even look at his sons. That was the part Meline would never forget, not the divorce papers sliding across the hospital blanket, not the cold click of his wedding ring against the metal bed rail, not even the way Dante Moretti straightened his cuffs afterward, like he'd just signed a business contract and not ended a marriage. What broke something permanently inside her chest was the way his eyes moved past the incubators. 3 of them. 3 tiny boys fighting for every breath behind the NICU glass, and Dante Moretti, the man who put them there, didn't even flinch. He looked at Meline instead, unmoved. "Sign them," he said, "and we're done." If you have ever been discarded by someone who once promised you everything, if you have ever watched a person look straight through you, like you stopped existing, then you already know what Meline felt in that moment. Because some betrayals don't announce themselves. They just stand at the foot of your hospital bed in a tailored black suit and wait. She didn't sign, and that decision changed everything. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Stories like this one don't come around every day. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city, what country are you watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning Meline Row went into labor. It was 31 degrees in Chicago, and the heating in the south wing of Marquette Private Hospital had gone out sometime before dawn. She remembered that detail later, the cold. The way the thin hospital gown did nothing against it. The way she kept asking the nurses for another blanket and kept getting told one was coming. Small things. The kind of small things you notice when your body is doing something terrifying and your mind needs somewhere else to be. She was 34 weeks pregnant with triplets. The doctors had been worried for 6 weeks. Too much pressure. Too little room. Numbers on monitors that the nurses tried to keep calm about but couldn't quite hide behind their expressions. Meline had been on modified bed rest since week 28, which meant she spent a lot of time in the house on Lakeshore Shore Drive, watching the lake change color and waiting for Dante to come home. He usually didn't. Not until after midnight. Sometimes not at all. She told herself it was work. The Moretti family had legitimate businesses, construction contracts, property development, 3 restaurant groups across the city. Dante ran all of it. Or at least that was the version Meline had agreed to believe when she married him 5 years ago, 29 years old, and certain she understood exactly who he was. She'd been wrong. She'd known she was wrong for at least 2 of those 5 years. But she'd stayed. Because of the babies. Because of the way he could still, on certain nights, look at her like she was the only solid thing in a world he didn't fully trust. Because leaving felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to say out loud. The labor started at 4:40 in the morning. She called Dante's cell phone. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She called the main number at his downtown office, which she wasn't supposed to have, but had memorized 2 years ago out of pure self-preservation, and a man whose voice she didn't recognize told her Mr. Moretti was unavailable and asked if he could take a message. She drove herself to the hospital. That part always caught people off guard when she told it later. The image didn't match Meline Row, 8 months pregnant with 3 babies, contracting every 4 minutes, hands tight on the steering wheel of a car she could barely fit behind anymore, alone on the expressway before dawn. But that was the thing about Meline that most people who looked at her missed entirely. She had spent so long arranging herself to fit inside Dante Moretti's life that she had almost forgotten there was a version of her that didn't need him to function. Almost. She made it to Marquette in 22 minutes. The ER staff got her into a wheelchair before she could argue, and by the time they reached the obstetrics floor, the attending on call, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Perkins, who looked like she hadn't slept in 30 hours and probably hadn't took one look at the monitor readout, and said quietly, but without any softening in her voice, "We're doing an emergency section." Right now, Meline said okay, she didn't have anyone to call. She thought about that for exactly 3 seconds, lying on the operating table under the hard fluorescent sleep, while the anesthesiologist explained what was about to happen. Then she stopped thinking about it because there was no point, and she needed everything she had left for what was coming. The boys arrived at 5:47, 5:51, and 5:53 in the morning. 3 boys. None of them cried. That silence was the most frightening sound Meline had ever heard in her life, the absolute terrible quiet of the delivery room in the seconds after each birth, before the NICU team moved in. She kept asking, voice rising each time, "Is he okay? Is he breathing? Is he?" And the nurses kept saying, "We're working on him," at that carefully neutral tone that told her nothing and terrified her completely. They stabilized all 3. Barely. The smallest one, the last one born, had to be bagged twice before his lungs agreed to cooperate. They put Meline in recovery. Someone finally brought her a blanket. A nurse told her the boys were in the NICU and that they were being monitored very closely, which again told her nothing, and she lay there in the recovery room with the anesthesia wearing off in her legs and the incision burning despite the medication, and she thought, where is Dante? He arrived at 11:43 that morning. She knew his footsteps. She had lived with them for 5 years, the particular weight and rhythm of them, the way they always sounded deliberate, like every step he took was one he'd already decided on. She heard them in the hallway outside the room and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Because even now, even after everything, some part of her had still wanted him to show up and be a person. He walked in, he was wearing the black suit. The good one, Brioni, hand-tailored, the one he wore when he had meetings that mattered. His hair was perfect. He'd shaved. He looked like he had slept 8 hours and spent the morning being completely fine, which told Meline everything she needed to know about where he had been when she was driving herself to the hospital alone. He looked at her, not at the incubators in the NICU behind the glass 2 doors down. Not at the monitor by her bed. At her. That careful, assessing look she had learned to read over 5 years, the one that meant he was deciding what to do next, not reacting to what was in front of him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed a folded document on the bed beside her right hand. "I need you to sign these," he said. Meline stared at the papers. Her hands weren't working right yet, the residual effects of the anesthesia, the blood pressure medication, the exhaustion that went so deep it had become its own kind of pain. She picked up the top page. Divorce petition, filed this morning. Dante Moretti, petitioner, Meline Anastasia Row Moretti, respondent. She read it twice, then she looked up at him. Dante. "I know the timing isn't ideal." His voice was level. Not cruel. Exactly, Dante had never been loud or dramatic about cruelty. It was one of the things that made him more frightening than men who shouted. "But I need this finalized before the quarterly review. The business situation has become complicated. The optics of the optics." She said it back to him and watched something in his face go briefly still. "There are ongoing transactions," he said carefully, "that are sensitive to scrutiny. A contested marriage, especially with the children's medical situation drawing attention." "Our children," Meline said. "Our sons, there are 3 of them, Dante. They're in the NICU right now. 2 of them are on oxygen." He didn't look toward the hallway. He didn't move at all. "I understand that," he said, "which is why the custody arrangement in the petition is generous. You'll have," she said it quietly, almost without emotion. "Get out of this room right now." Something shifted behind his eyes. Guilt. Calculation. "Meline, don't make this." "I said, get out." He stood there for 3 full seconds. She counted them. Then he straightened his jacket, and he left, and she sat in the hospital bed with the divorce papers on the blanket beside her and her 3 sons 30 feet away fighting to breathe. And she thought, okay, so that's what we're doing. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry and too frightened, and somehow, somewhere underneath the fear and the anger and the absolute bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had just had emergency surgery, while emotionally alone, somewhere underneath all of that, something very quiet and very old clicked into place, like a lock engaging. Like a door she hadn't known was there opening the smallest possible crack. She did not know yet what was on the other side of it. She pressed the call button and asked the nurse if someone could bring her a phone charger and a glass of water, in that order, because she needed to figure out who she was calling first, and her battery was at 11%. The nurse brought both. She also brought another blanket, finally, without being asked. Meline sat us up as straight as she could manage, with a fresh surgical incision, and started making decisions. The first thing she did was call a lawyer. Not a family attorney, a litigator. A woman named Patricia Gaines, who she had found 3 months ago and saved in her phone under PG Dentist because she had known, even 3 months ago, that she might eventually need her, and that she needed Dante not to know she'd looked. Patricia's office didn't open until 9, so Meline left a message that was careful and specific and left absolutely nothing out that mattered. The second thing she did was ask the nurse to call the NICU charge nurse. She needed someone to explain to her, in plain language, exactly what was happening with each of her sons. Names, conditions, current status. She was their mother and she had a right to know, and she would like to know now, please. The charge nurse came within 10 minutes. Her name was Sandra, and she had the kind of face that told you she had delivered a lot of hard news in her life and had decided somewhere along the way to be honest about it rather than gentle. Meline appreciated that immediately. The first boy, she was already thinking of them as first, second, and third in the order they were born, because she hadn't named them yet, because Dante was supposed to have been there for that conversation. First was 4 pounds 1 ounce and was on supplemental oxygen with moderate respiratory distress. Stable for now, but requiring close monitoring. Second was 3 pounds 12 ounces, slightly jaundiced and showing signs of early feeding difficulties. Also stable. Third, the smallest, the last, the one who had been bagged twice, was 3 pounds 3 ounces and was currently the most critical. He had required respiratory support since birth and was being monitored for possible pulmonary complications. What kind of pulmonary complications? Meline asked. Sandra didn't sugarcoat it. Possible underdeveloped lung tissue. Possible early-stage pneumothorax air leaking out of the lung. They would know more in 12 to 24 hours depending on how he responded. Can I see them? As soon as you're medically cleared to transfer to a wheelchair. How long? Couple of hours minimum. You had major surgery this morning, Mrs. Moretti, Row, Meline said automatically. My name is Row. Sandra wrote something on her clipboard and didn't comment on it. It was while Meline was waiting to be cleared for the wheelchair, while she was sitting with the divorce papers still on the bed because she had not touched them again and did not intend to that Dante's next move arrived. Not him personally. He worked through intermediaries when possible, which was one of the things she had always found both frightening and, once she understood it, clarifying. Dante didn't do things himself when he could have them done for him. It meant you were always looking for where the actual movement was coming from, not where he was standing. The hospital administrator, a soft-spoken man named Gerald Haynes, who had the particular manner of someone who was deeply uncomfortable with conflict and had chosen a profession that constantly required him to deal with it, came to her room at 1:15 in the afternoon. He explained with many apologies and several digressions that Meline did not have the patience for, that there had been a review of her insurance coverage, and that her current private corner with a window that overlooked the parking structure would need to be reassigned. A shared room was available on the same floor. He also mentioned, very gently and with great regret, that the financial guarantor on her account had contacted the billing department with some changes to the payment arrangement. What changes? Meline said. Gerald Haynes was deeply unhappy to be in this room. There's been a request to transfer primary financial responsibility to you directly, Mrs. Moretti, pending the finalization of Dante froze my accounts, she said flatly. Not a question. Gerald Haynes looked at the wall above her head. I'm not in a position to speak to the specifics of... He froze my accounts, she said again. Okay, fine. She picked up her phone. I'm going to need a few minutes, Gerald. Thank you. She called Patricia Gaines's office again. This time, Patricia answered personally, which meant Patricia had heard the first message and understood the situation well enough to pick up herself. Tell me everything from the beginning, Patricia said. Meline did. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping. Her voice stayed flat and controlled the entire time, the way it did when she was most frightened, because she had learned early that showing fear to the wrong people gave them something to use. Patricia listened. She asked 4 questions, all of them precise. Then she said, don't sign anything. Don't move rooms unless they physically make you. Document every conversation. I'm filing an emergency response to the divorce petition this afternoon. He froze the accounts. I know. We'll address that. Meline, a pause. He filed this morning. He's moving fast. Which means either he's overconfident or he's worried. Which do you think? I'll know more by end of day. Sit tight. Meline set the phone down. She sat in the hospital bed that Dante was trying to get her out of, in the room Dante was trying to reassign her from, with the papers Dante had placed next to her hand, and she thought about the look on his face when he walked in that morning. The suit, the deliberateness, the way he hadn't looked at the hallway where their sons were. She had spent 5 years trying to understand Dante Moretti, trying to locate the version of him she had married, the one who, on a January night in the second month they were together, had sat on the kitchen floor with her at 2 in the morning because she'd had a nightmare and couldn't get back to sleep. And he had not made her feel small for it. That man had existed. She was certain of it. Or she had believed she was certain, which might not be the same thing. But this man, the one in the black suit who placed divorce papers on a hospital bed, without looking at his sons, this man she understood clearly now. He thought she had nothing. He had always, on some fundamental level, believed that about her. That she was manageable, that she had come to him with nothing, and that everything she was now existed because of his decisions. It was the kind of belief that was so deep and so structural in a person that they stopped being aware of it. It just became the air they breathed, the water they moved through. Of course she had nothing. Of course she needed him. Of course she would sign. The door to her room opened. She expected Gerald Haynes again, or a nurse, or possibly one of Dante's people. He had a habit of sending Cursuso, his personal assistant, to handle conversations he wanted handled without his direct fingerprints. It was none of those people. The man who walked in was somewhere in his early 60s, with the particular kind of stillness that comes not from calmness, but from discipline. He was carrying a leather briefcase that was old enough to be deliberate, the kind of object that announced you had chosen it, rather than simply acquired it. He was dressed precisely but not expensively, a gray suit and a dark tie, and he wore glasses that he took off immediately when he saw her, folding them into his breast pocket with a gesture that felt almost ceremonial. "Mrs. Moretti," he said. Then, correcting himself with a careful look, "Row, who are you?" she said. He set the briefcase on the chair beside the door and opened it with both latches simultaneously, a practice motion. He removed a sealed envelope, cream-colored, with her name written on the front in handwriting she didn't recognize and immediately recognized. Her father's handwriting. Her father had been dead for 9 years. She stared at the envelope without touching it. "My name is Silas Whitmore," the man said. "I was your father's attorney. I've been waiting. His specific instructions were to wait until you were either in serious danger or until the circumstances of your life reached the particular kind of crisis that would make what I have to tell you not just important, but necessary." He paused. "I think we're there." Meline looked at him, then at the envelope, then at the divorce papers still on the blanket beside her. "My father," she said, "Edward Rowe." "Yes, my father's been dead for 9 years. And you've been what? Watching? Waiting for the right moment?" Those were his instructions. He was very specific about timing. Silas Whitmore's voice was dry and factual in the way of someone who had been carrying this particular burden for a long time and had made his peace with the weight of it. "He said you would need to be ready. That telling you before you were ready would only hurt you. And he decided I'm ready now. He made his decisions 9 years ago. I'm only following them." The envelope sat on the chair beside the briefcase. Her name in her father's handwriting. The man who had taught her to drive on an empty parking lot in the rain, who had taken her to every school play she was ever in, even the terrible ones, who had died of a heart attack on an ordinary Tuesday morning when Meline was 25, and who she had grieved so completely and so privately that most people who knew her had no idea how long the absence of him still sat in her chest sometimes. That man had apparently anticipated this exact moment and arranged for it to be handled. She didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. She picked up the envelope. Before she could open it, the door burst open, not violently, but urgently. The way door open, when the person pushing them is trying to move faster than walking, allows without actually running. It was Sandra, the NICU charge nurse, and her face had changed entirely from the professional neutrality of an hour ago. "Ms. Rowe." Sandra was already moving toward her, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who was controlling alarm with effort. "I need you to hear me clearly. Your third son, we're seeing a significant change in his respiratory readings. The team is with him now. We need you to be available for consent decisions." Immediately, Meline was already sitting up, already reaching for the rails of the bed. The envelope was still in her hand. "Someone needs to push this wheelchair faster," she said. And then something happened that she did not expect. Silas Whitmore, who she had known for approximately 4 minutes, picked up her IV stand, stepped beside the wheelchair that appeared in the doorway, and moved with her into the hallway like he had always been there. She was too frightened for her son to wonder about that yet. But she would think about it later. Down the hall in the NICU, 3 tiny boys were fighting. Her sons. Her blood. The thing she had been most afraid of and most certain of for 34 weeks, afraid of what would happen to them, certain that she would do anything in the world to protect them. She had no money. She had no leverage. She had a freshly filed divorce petition and a frozen bank account and a husband who had placed papers on her hospital bed without looking at his sons. What she had was the envelope. What she had was a name she hadn't used in 5 years, Row. Meline Row. What she didn't know yet, what she was about to find out, was what that name meant. Behind the NICU glass, monitors spiked. The medical team moved in tight, precise patterns around the smallest incubator. A machine began a sound that everyone in that hallway recognized as urgency made audible. Meline pressed her palm flat against the glass. She could not go in yet. They needed room to work. But she stayed at that glass without moving, and she did not look away, and the envelope from her dead father was pressed against her chest, and somewhere behind her in the hospital lobby, Dante Moretti was on a phone call, and across the city in a downtown office, a woman named Vivian Cross was sending a message to a journalist, and in a server room connected to a holding company connected to a trust fund that Meline Row had never been told existed. A clock that her father had wound 9 years ago was very quietly beginning to run. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew the glass was cold against her palm, and her son was on the other side of it, and she was not leaving. This is a work of complete cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. The monitor did not stop alarming on its own. That was the thing Meline kept returning to later. In the quiet hours after everything had shifted, the fact that it took 4 minutes and 2 respiratory therapists, and 1 very specific adjustment to the pressure settings on the ventilator, before the sound changed from urgent to merely watchful. 4 minutes that felt like something you could drown in. She stood at the glass with her palm pressed flat against it and counted her own heartbeats, because that was the only number she could track, and she counted 53 of them before the lead NICU physician, a tall man named Dr. Okafor, who moved through emergencies with the particular economy of someone who had learned not to waste motion, finally turned and walked toward the door where she was waiting. He came out to the hallway, pulled the mask down from his face. "He's stable," he said. For the moment, Meline repeated. "He's a fighter. That's not nothing." Dr. Okafor looked at her with the kind of directness that she had come to recognize in the last several hours as a sign of respect rather than coldness. "We're watching for pneumothorax. Right now the readings are holding, but I want you to understand that this can change quickly with a baby this small. If it changes, we move fast. I need you reachable at all times. I'm not going anywhere." He studied her face for a moment, the IV line still in her arm, the pallor of someone who had lost blood and hadn't replaced it yet, the fresh surgical dressing visible at the edge of her hospital gown. "You just had a C-section this morning," he said. "I know what I had." She said it without heat. "I'll stay in the wheelchair. I just need to be on this floor." He nodded once. He went back inside. Silas Whitmore was standing 6 feet behind her. He had not spoken since the hallway outside her room. He was holding her IV stand and the leather briefcase simultaneously, which should have looked absurd and somehow did not. She turned to look at him. "Tell me what's in the envelope," she said. "Perhaps somewhere more private. There's no one in this hallway, except you and me and a woman at the nurse's station who is pretending not to listen." Meline looked at him steadily. "Tell me now." Short version. "My son is on the other side of that glass, and I have divorce papers sitting on my hospital bed, and I don't have time for a long version right now." Silas Whitmore set the briefcase down carefully on the floor. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man assembling the shortest possible route through a very complex map. "Your father built something," he said, "over 20 years. Quietly, deliberately, in parallel to everything the public knew about Edward Row. A network of holding companies, legitimate financial infrastructure investments, property trusts, equities and stakes in manufacturing, and logistics and technology. He called the whole structure the Rowan Syndicate." A pause. "Not a criminal organization, a financial one, but structured to be invisible to the kind of people who would have used it against him if they'd known." Meline stared at him. "My father was an accountant." Your father was one of the most sophisticated financial architects of the last 30 years. The accountant was a persona he maintained because it kept him safe. Silas's voice was dry and entirely certain. He was also very good at it. The numbers were always correct. That part wasn't a lie. She absorbed this. Behind the NICU glass, she could see Dr. Okafor making an adjustment to something near the smallest incubator. Her hands tightened on the wheelchair armrests. "What does this have to do with Dante?" she said. Silas Whitmore looked at her with the kind of expression that precedes information that cannot be ungiven. Several of the holding companies within the Rowan Syndicate made substantial investments in Moretti-connected businesses over a period of approximately 8 years. Construction contracts, property development, 2 of the restaurant groups. He paused again. Your father didn't know, when those investments were made, who ultimately controlled those businesses. When he found out, he created a contingency. He restructured the assets so that the controlling interest would pass directly to you on your 35th birthday or earlier under specific triggering conditions. Meline was quiet for a moment. The hallway had that particular hospital silence, not peaceful, but pressurized, the silence of a place where things that can't be taken back are constantly happening. "How much?" she said. "Controlling stakes in 11 businesses. Approximate combined asset value as of the last audit." He reached into the briefcase and removed a single page. $430 million. She did not react immediately. She had the sensation of a woman standing at the edge of something large and steep, looking down, trying to understand the scale of the distance. "And Dante doesn't know," she said. "He does not. But some of those businesses are ones he considers entirely his own." "Yes." She exhaled slowly through her nose. In the NICU, nothing alarmed. The monitoring continued. Third son, small enough to hold in one hand, fighting for every breath. "What does the envelope say?" she asked. Silas nodded at her hands. She was still holding it. She had forgotten. She opened it. Her father's handwriting. 5 pages, dense and careful, the handwriting of a man who thought in complete sentences and believed in getting things right the first time. She read the first paragraph twice. Then she looked up. "He says he's sorry," she said. The words came out more stripped down than she intended. "He said that to me in person as well," Silas said quietly. "Several times. He believed the secrecy was necessary. He also believed it cost you something. He wasn't wrong about either." She folded the letter back into the envelope. Not because she'd finished, she hadn't. Not even close, but because she needed both hands and a clear head, and she could feel the emotion trying to move upward through her chest, and she needed it to wait. "Okay," she said. "What do I do first?" It was then that Dante arrived on the floor. She heard him before she saw him, that particular quality of footsteps she had memorized, and beneath it a second set, slightly faster and slightly lighter. She recognized the second set too. Caruso. Marcus Caruso, 28 years old, third-generation Moretti employee, the kind of loyalty that was bred rather than chosen. He went everywhere Dante wanted handled without Dante's direct presence, which meant Dante had not planned this as a conversation. He'd planned it as an action. Dante turned the corner from the elevator bank and stopped when he saw her. He looked at Silas. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it shifted the way a calculation changes when a variable you didn't account for enters the equation. "Who is this?" he said. Meline looked at her husband, her almost former husband, and felt the strange clarity that comes after a long time of managing fear when the fear runs out and something more useful takes its place. "Someone I'm meeting with," she said. "Meline." He took 3 steps toward her. Caruso remained at the corner, which meant he was blocking the route back to the elevator, which meant this had been arranged. "You need to go back to your room. This floor isn't." "My sons are on this floor," she said. "I'm not leaving it. The doctor said you need rest. The situation with the boys is being what?" Her voice was quiet. The quieter she got, she had learned, the more it unsteadied him. "Being handled? By who, Dante? You haven't looked at them once." A muscle moved in his jaw. "You walked into my room this morning with divorce papers and you didn't even look at the hallway." She said it the way you say something that you have decided to stop managing. "They were 30 feet away and you didn't look. The legal situations." "Stop." She put her hand up, actually raised it, palm out, and watched his face tighten at the gesture, because Dante Moretti was not a man who was stopped by a hand. "I'm not signing those papers. I want you to hear that clearly. I am not signing anything." He looked at Silas again. Who is this man? Silas Whitmore introduced himself in 4 words, his name and the word attorney. Dante's expression did something complex at the word not surprise, exactly, but the reassessment of a man who had thought this room contained 1 piece and now sees it contains 2. She doesn't need an attorney, Dante said. We're resolving this privately. We are resolving this, Silas said pleasantly, through proper legal channels, beginning with the emergency response to your morning filing, which was submitted approximately 40 minutes ago. He removed his phone from his pocket and showed Dante the timestamp on the confirmation email without handing it over. Dante looked at it, then at Meline, then at Silas. He made the calculation visibly, which was unusual for him. He was normally much better at hiding the math. I'll have my attorneys contact you, he said to Silas. To Meline, quieter, with what she recognized as his version of a warning dressed as concern, you should rest. What happened this morning was serious. You shouldn't be making decisions right now. My decisions are fine, she said. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he left. Caruso followed. The elevator doors closed. Meline let out a breath she hadn't tracked herself holding. The hand that had been braced on the wheelchair armrest was white-knuckled, and she made herself uncurl it deliberately, finger by finger. He'll move fast, she said to Silas. He already is, Silas agreed. What's the most dangerous thing he can do in the next 24 hours? Silas considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Custody motion. Emergency filing, citing your medical instability and the complexity of the birth circumstances. If he gets in front of a sympathetic judge, can he? He has influence with 3 members of the Cook County bench that I know of. Probably more that I don't. Silas paused. But your attorney filed first. And what he filed contains specifics. That matters. What else? The financial freeze he's already started. Cutting off your accounts was easy, they were, in both names, and he had the instruments to do it. But your father's assets were never in both names. They were never in your name at all, legally speaking, until they are formally transferred. That transfer requires activation of Protocol Orion. He said it the way her father had written it in the letter, like it was a specific thing with weight and consequence, which requires your formal acceptance of the inheritance. On the record, what does that look like? A deposition. Or a signed statement with witnesses. Your father specified 2 witnesses who have been waiting for 9 years. He paused. One of them is me. Who's the other? The name Silas gave her was one she didn't recognize. She filed it. There was too much incoming information, and she was tracking it imperfectly. The medication made everything slightly out of focus at the edges, and the fear for her sons kept interrupting everything else with a physical force she could not entirely control. She asked him to put the key documents somewhere she could review them from the wheelchair. He did. She read while sitting outside the NICU glass, which was not the most efficient arrangement, but was the only one she could live with. It was at 2:40 in the afternoon that Vivian Cross appeared. Meline had known about Vivian for 11 months. She had known with the particular nauseating certainty that comes not from evidence but from a change in texture, the way a room feels different after someone has been in it, the way a person's voice shifts slightly when they're managing something they believe they're hiding. She had confirmed it in the way you confirm something you already know, 8 months ago. She had not told Dante she knew. She had been deciding what to do with the knowledge when the pregnancy complications began, and the decision got buried under everything else. Vivian Cross was 31 years old and had the specific kind of beauty that was designed to be read as effortless and had actually required tremendous effort to construct. She was Dante's public relations director. She was, by all appearances, in the building to manage messaging around, and Meline understood this in real time, reading the angle of Vivian's approach and the journalist beside her the story. There was a journalist, young with a press badge from a local outlet, notebook out. Vivian hadn't come to the NICU floor. She had stopped at the nursing station near the elevator, visible from where Meline sat, and she was speaking with the energy of someone performing helpfulness, the concerned colleague, the responsible spokesperson, the person who had come to assist with something delicate. Meline watched her. Silas watched Meline watch her. That's Vivian Cross, Meline said. I know who she is. She's talking to a journalist, yes. What's the story going to be? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then precisely, emotional instability. Post-surgical impairment. Questions about your capacity to make decisions regarding the children's care. Possibly details about the circumstances of the birth arriving alone, No family present. Framed sympathetically but written to create doubt. Meline felt the anger move through her in a wave, not hot cold. The kind of cold that focuses rather than blinds. She's his, she said. Yes. How long that I can document? 14 months. Silas said it without inflection, which was a choice. Your father's contingency plan included surveillance protocols. He had people watching Moretti's associates because he needed to understand the exposure of the Rowan assets. Vivian Cross appeared in those records. Meline turned away from Vivian and back to the NICU glass. Her sons were on the other side, all three of them. She focused on that. I want everything you have on her, she said. On the relationship, on the timing, on what she's done for him. Every piece. It's in the briefcase. She looked at him. Of course it is. The rest of the afternoon moved in the particular brutal way of days that contain too many things. Patricia Gaines called at 3:15 with an update on the emergency response filing. She had requested a hearing on the account freeze, and the judge was reviewing. She had also filed a motion to establish Meline's primary custodial status on the basis that the father had not visited the NICU or engaged with the children's medical care. She said this last part in a tone that was professionally neutral and personally furious, which Meline appreciated. Dr. Okafor came out twice more, third son holding steady. Second son's jaundice was being addressed with phototherapy. First son's respiratory numbers were slightly improved, which was the first genuinely good news of the day, and Meline held onto it with both hands. A nurse whose name tag said Beatrice brought Meline dinner on a tray without being asked soup and crackers and a small carton of juice, and told her that the NICU night staff came on at 7 and that the overnight team was very good and that she should try to eat something because the doctors couldn't take care of her boys if she collapsed. It was the most direct act of unsolicited kindness Meline had experienced in the last 12 hours, and she was so exhausted that it nearly cracked her composure. She ate the soup. It was terrible. She ate all of it. At 5:47, she noted the time because it matched exactly the time of first birth, 12 hours earlier, which felt like something she would remember. Gerald Haynes appeared again. He had the same expression of profound personal discomfort he'd worn at 1:15, only compounded. He explained that there had been a formal request, submitted through legal channels, for a temporary order restricting Meline's access to the NICU pending the outcome of the custody determination. She stared at him. Someone filed a motion, she said, to keep me out of the NICU. A temporary provisional. Someone filed a motion to keep a post-surgical mother out of the NICU where her premature sons are in critical condition. Gerald Haynes was looking at a point approximately 4 feet to her left. The motion asserts that your current medical condition, combined with what's described as erratic decision-making since admission, creates a potential disruption to the medical environment. Who filed it? He gave her the law firm name. She didn't recognize it, but wrote it on the back of one of Silas's documents. She also noted that it had been filed at 4:32, which meant Dante had started it before he left the floor. Possibly before he even walked onto the floor. He had come here this afternoon not to negotiate and not to warn her. He had come to look at the situation directly and confirm that the motion should proceed. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when he turned the corner and saw Silas standing there. Variable he hadn't accounted for. Now she had to figure out how fast he would move once he realized the variable was larger than it looked. The motion hasn't been granted, Silas said quietly from beside her. Yet, she said. Yet he agreed. Patricia will oppose it tonight. Emergency hearings on NICU access have a particular... I know. She rubbed her face with both hands, careful of the IV line. I know. I need to think, she thought. The situation was this. Dante had money, influence, 3 bench relationships, a media operation in the form of Vivian Cross, and a law firm that had apparently been prepared for exactly this scenario and had filed a motion within hours of the divorce papers being served. He had moved so quickly and so completely that it felt rehearsed, and she understood, sitting outside the NICU with soup in her stomach and her father's letter in her hand, that it probably was. He had been planning this. Not today, this wasn't reactive. This was built. He had been building this for weeks, possibly months, and she had not seen it because she'd been too sick and too pregnant and too exhausted and too unwilling, on some deep level, to believe that the man she had married, the man who would do this. Now she believed it. She opened the letter again. Read further. Her father wrote, in his careful accountant's handwriting, "There will be a moment when what they've taken feels like everything, and what remains feels like nothing. That is exactly when you need to know that nothing is not the same as zero. Zero is what someone else tells you you have. Nothing is what you haven't counted yet." She read it twice. Then she asked Silas to explain Protocol Orion to her in detail. He did. It took 40 minutes and 3 of Silas's printed documents and 1 phone call to the second witnesses, a woman named Helene Park, her father's former financial director, currently in New York, who answered on the second ring and said simply, "I've been waiting for your call to lay out completely what activating the protocol would mean, what it required, and what it would do to Dante's business infrastructure once it was in motion." When Silas finished, Meline was quiet for a moment. "If I do this," she said, "there's no walking it back." "No," Silas agreed, "and he'll know immediately, within 24 hours. Some of it within hours." She looked through the NICU glass. 3 incubators, 3 tiny heartbeats, her sons who had been in the world for 14 hours and had spent all of those hours fighting. "He hasn't seen them," she said. It came out low and rough. "He has been in this building for how many hours? And he hasn't gone in there once." Silas didn't answer because there was no answer to give. "What do I need to sign?" she said. At 7:12 that evening, as the night shift came on and the hallways outside the NICU shifted into its quieter after-hours rhythm, Meline Row signed the formal acceptance documents for the Rowan inheritance. Silas witnessed. Helene Park witnessed by secure video connection from a hotel room in Manhattan. The timestamps were precise. The documents were triple copied. Protocol Orion did not make a sound when it started. There was no ceremony, no shift in the air, no visible change in anything around her. The papers went into Silas's briefcase. He made 2 phone calls, both brief, both in the clipped language of someone activating something long prepared. Then he said, "It's done." Meline nodded. She didn't feel powerful. She felt tired in a way that was beyond physical, the specific exhaustion of a day that had started with her driving herself to a hospital at 4:40 in the morning and had not stopped demanding things of her since. Her incision hurt. Her hands were unsteady. She had not slept. But she had done it. At 9:43, her phone rang. It was Patricia Gaines. She spoke quickly. The motion to bar Meline from the NICU had not only been filed, but had received a provisional approval from a judge. Meline didn't know, effective as of 10 o'clock the following morning. Patricia was appealing immediately, but the timeline was tight and the judge had moved faster than expected. "Which judge?" Meline said. Patricia told her. Silas, who had heard the name, opened his laptop without a word and started typing. "He's one of the 3," Meline said. "He is," Patricia confirmed. Her voice had the quality of controlled fury that Meline was starting to recognize as Patricia's operational mode. "It's not over. We file tonight, but Meline, you should know. They're moving very fast. This isn't just a divorce. This looks coordinated." "It is coordinated," Meline said. "He's been planning it." A silence on Patricia's end. "For how long? I don't know yet. Long enough to have the judge ready. Then we need to move on the financial exposure. The account freeze is one thing a judge will overturn that once we demonstrate necessity for the children's care. But if he's using the custody case to build a pattern of you as unstable, we need to counter that with something concrete. Something that shows a different picture." "I have something," Meline said. She looked at the briefcase. "I have a lot of things." She ended the call. It was 10 minutes later that the second journalist appeared, not the one from the afternoon, a different one, from a larger outlet. He hadn't come to the NICU floor. He'd gone to the hospital lobby, where he spoke with Vivian Cross for 20 minutes, and the story she was feeding him, Meline's nurse, Beatrice, told her this secondhand with the precise efficiency of a woman who believed in keeping the right people informed, included photographs. Photographs of Meline in the hospital, of the circumstances of the birth, of her arriving at the ER alone at 4:40 in the morning. Someone had photographed her arriving at the ER. She thought about that for a moment. The darkness of the parking lot, the rain that had started around 4, the image of herself in a hospital gown and rain-soaked coat leaning against the car for support before she got into the wheelchair. Someone had been there, at 4:40 in the morning, with a camera, which meant the media operation hadn't this afternoon with Vivian Cross's first visit. It had started before the birth. She looked at Silas. He was already watching her face. "He was going to do this regardless of what I did," she said. "Not a question. The plan was in place, Silas said carefully. Whether you signed the papers or not, whether you cooperated or not. A pause. You were going to be managed, Meline. The only variable he hadn't anticipated was Protocol Orion. She felt the weight of that settle into her chest, the specific disorienting gravity of understanding that the situation had been worse than she thought for longer than she knew, and that the version of events she'd been living in had always had another story running beneath it like an underground current. She had not been paranoid. She had been, if anything, not paranoid enough. At 11:15, the smallest boy's monitor alarmed again. She was out of the wheelchair and at the glass before she consciously decided to move. IV line swinging, feet finding the cold tile. Dr. Okafor was inside in 30 seconds, the night team moving with him. She watched through the glass, hands pressing flat, and she breathed, and she counted, and she did not look away. The stabilization took 7 minutes this time. When Okafor came out, he didn't have the same expression as before. He had a different one, still controlled, still precise, but with something underneath it that told her the news was being managed carefully. Tell me, she said, he told her. The third boy's lung was showing early signs of the collapse they'd been watching for. It hadn't happened yet, it was a leading indicator, a pattern in the readings that preceded a pneumothorax rather than confirmed one. But the window they were working in had narrowed. They were moving from monitoring to preparedness. If the readings shifted again, they would need to act immediately. An invasive procedure, a needle thoracentesis, potentially a chest tube if the pressure was significant. In a baby weighing 3 pounds 3 ounces in his first 24 hours of life. Survival rate, she said. He gave her numbers. The procedure itself was not the problem. The problem was the underlying lung development, the question of whether the lung could sustain itself after intervention or whether the intervention would need to be repeated. What's the alternative to the procedure, she said. There isn't one, he said. If it progresses, we act. The question is only how quickly. She nodded. She asked him what she needed to sign to ensure she was the person authorizing all decisions regarding her son's care. He gave her the forms. She signed them. Right there in the hallway, leaning on the wheelchair armrest, IV line in her left arm and a pen in her right hand, because she would be the one who authorized their care, and she would be the one who made those decisions. And there was no version of reality in which Dante Moretti, who had been in this building for hours and had not gone into that room once, would be the one deciding what happened to her sons. She gave Okafor back the forms. He went inside. She stayed at the glass. Silas sat in the chair behind her and did not speak, which was the right thing to do. At 11:58, 2 minutes before midnight, before the full day was technically over, before the 24th hour of her sons' lives had been completed, Meline's phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize. It was a photograph. The photograph showed Vivian Cross and Dante Moretti in the hospital parking structure. Taken tonight, within the last 3 hours, based on the timestamp. Vivian's hand on his arm, his face turned toward her. A posture that was recognizable and specific and completely, absolutely clear in what it was. Below the photograph, one line of text he isn't going to stop. Neither should you. Someone who knew your father. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she looked up at Silas. Did you send this? She said. He looked at the phone, at the number. His expression shifted fractionally, not surprise, but the recognition of something he hadn't arranged, but wasn't entirely unprepared for. No, he said, but your father had more than one contingency and more than one person watching. He paused. It appears that one of them has decided you're ready to know. She set the phone face down on her knee. She thought about what Patricia had said. This isn't just a divorce. This is coordinated. She thought about the photographer at 4:40 in the morning. She thought about the judge who had approved the NICU restriction motion within hours. She thought about Vivian Cross in the parking structure while their sons were upstairs fighting for oxygen. And she thought about Protocol Orion and Silas's phone calls and the documents now in transit through a financial architecture her father had built specifically for this moment. A moment her father had apparently anticipated so precisely that he had planned a 9-year contingency for it and waited through her entire marriage, through everything, for the triggering condition that would tell him she was finally in enough danger to need the truth. She had been in danger longer than she knew, so had her sons. Dante was not going to stop. He had a judge, he had journalists, he had Vivian. He had a law firm on standby and a media narrative being built from materials he'd collected before her sons were even born. He had moved so completely and so fast that by morning, the story that would exist in the world was the one he had decided to tell: the unstable wife, the complicated birth, the reasonable husband trying to protect his children from a woman who couldn't make sound decisions. Except Protocol Orion had activated at 7:12 that evening, and the 11 businesses whose controlling interest now lived in Meline Row's name included 3 that Dante Moretti had personally guaranteed to his lenders as wholly his own. He didn't know yet. He would. She looked through the NICU glass at her 3 sons and felt something clarify in her chest, not rage, not even determination exactly, but something quieter and more permanent. The specific resolution of a woman who had spent 5 years softening her edges to fit inside someone else's life and had just, today, run completely out of reasons to continue. She had not started this, but she was not going to lose it. The monitor above the smallest incubator held steady. 3 pounds 3 ounces, first day of life. Still here. Tomorrow morning, she said to Silas, without turning from the glass, when the NICU restriction takes effect, if Patricia's appeal hasn't overturned it by then, what happens? Security staff will enforce it. You'll be escorted from the floor. And if I refuse, they'll call hospital administration. And if I still refuse, a long pause. That would likely give Dante's attorneys grounds to argue contempt, which would accelerate the custody hearing. She nodded slowly, thought. Then we need Patricia to win tonight, she said. She's working on it. Tell her she stopped. Reconsidered. No, don't tell her anything. She knows what she's doing. Another pause. Tells her I said thank you. Silas made a note. The night nurse came by and told Meline, gently but firmly, that she needed to take her medication and try to sleep, even in the chair, even here. Her body had been through something serious, and refusing to acknowledge it wouldn't help her sons. She took the medication. She did not sleep. She watched the glass and thought about her father, who had built a financial empire, invisible to everyone who wanted to use it against her, and had waited 9 years for the moment when she would need it, and had been right about the moment with a precision that was either genius or grief. She thought about the letter, still in the envelope in her lap, and the pages she hadn't finished yet. She thought about Julian, her brother, mentioned in the letter's 3rd page, alive, hidden, waiting. A detail so large she had not yet had the space to let it become real. She thought about Dante in the parking structure, with Vivian's hand on his arm. And then, somewhere around 2 in the morning, exhausted past the point where exhaustion had language, she thought, he thinks he's already won. That was his mistake. That had always been his mistake. He thought winning was something you declared, something you filed and ordered and arranged through intermediaries, and managed through PR and installed with a sympathetic judge. He had never understood that some things can't be filed or frozen or photographed or managed. Her sons were in that room. She was their mother. And tomorrow morning, when the sun came up over a city that didn't know her name yet, Dante Moretti was going to discover that the woman he had placed those papers beside, weak, post-surgical, alone, with no money and no resources and no power, had spent the night becoming something else entirely. The monitor held 3 heartbeats, and outside the glass their mother sat in the dark and waited for morning with the patience of someone who finally, for the first time in 5 years, had absolutely nothing left to lose. This is a work of complete cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. The appeal came through at 6:14 in the morning. Patricia Gaines called with the news in a voice that was professionally controlled and personally exhausted. She had been awake all night, which Meline understood without being told, because she had been awake all night too. And the particular quality of a human voice after no sleep is unmistakable, regardless of how well trained the person is at hiding it. The restriction order is stayed, Patricia said, temporarily. The appellate judge found insufficient grounds for emergency restriction of maternal access to critically ill newborns. Dante's attorneys can refile with additional documentation, but it buys us time. How much time? 72 hours minimum before they can get another hearing. Meline exhaled. Her whole body did something complicated, a physical release of tension, so complete it felt briefly like falling. Okay, she said. Good. What's next? The account freeze hearing is at 9. I need you reachable by phone. I'll be here. She ended the call and sat for a moment in the pre-dawn quiet of the NICU hallway. The night shift was still on. The lights were still at their lower evening setting, the particular amber half-dark of a hospital floor between midnight and morning when the pace slows to something almost bearable. Silas had gone to a hotel 3 hours ago at her insistence she needed him functional, not destroyed, and a 60-year-old man sleeping in a hospital chair helped neither of them. He would be back by 8. She looked through the glass. Third son was still on respiratory support. The numbers hadn't alarmed again since 217, and Dr. Okafor's night counterpart, a quiet woman named Dr. Singh, had come by at 4 to tell her the readings were holding in an acceptable range. Not good. Acceptable. Meline had filed that distinction carefully. First son's oxygen levels had improved. Second son's jaundice was responding to the phototherapy lamp. These were small things. She held them. She opened her father's letter and read the pages she hadn't reached yet. The section about Julian was 3 paragraphs. Her father wrote it the way he wrote everything directly, without ornamentation, as if getting to the fact as quickly as possible was itself a form of kindness. Julian was alive. He had been living under a different name, in a city her father didn't name in the letter because even this letter sealed for 9 years, intended only for her, had been written with the awareness that it might be read by someone else. Julian had known about the Rowan Syndicate. He had been, in fact, a more active participant in its management than Meline. He had agreed to disappear when their father determined that a threat within the criminal networks surrounding the Rowan investments had identified him. He had been waiting for Protocol Orion, the same as everyone else. He will find you, her father wrote. When the protocol activates, he will know. Give him time. He moves carefully. It is the thing he and I share that you and I do not. You, Meline, have always moved like you are running out of time. I do not say this as criticism. I say it because you should know yourself clearly. Knowing yourself clearly is the only defense that cannot be taken from you. She read that paragraph 4 times. Then she folded the letter and put it in the inner pocket of the cardigan someone had brought her from her hospital room, Beatrice. The night nurse, who had appeared at midnight with a bag containing the cardigan, a pair of socks, and a granola bar, and had not made a single comment about any of it. At 7:45, she was actually standing, having graduated from the wheelchair to a slow, careful upright position that her body objected to strenuously but permitted at the NICU window when she heard the elevator open and registered, without turning, that the footsteps coming down the hall were not Silas and not hospital staff. She knew them anyway, different from Dante's lighter. Faster. The walk of someone younger and less certain of their own authority, which is to say someone who was trying to project authority they hadn't yet fully inhabited. Marcus Caruso stopped 4 feet behind her, Mrs. Moretti. Row, she said, still looking through the glass, and whatever you're about to tell me, make it fast. A pause. She could feel him calculating not a stupid person, Caruso, just a person whose loyalty had calcified early enough that it had replaced independent thought in certain areas. Mr. Moretti would like to meet, he said. This morning. Somewhere neutral. She turned to look at him. He was 28 and had the face of someone who had spent years watching things he wasn't comfortable with and had learned to make himself comfortable with them anyway. She felt something that was not quite sympathy and not quite contempt, something more specific than either. Where does he consider neutral? There's a conference room on the 3rd floor. Hospital administration uses it for I know where it is. She turned back to the glass. Tell him 9:30. Tell him I'm bringing my attorney. A pause. He'd prefer... Tell him 9:30, she said again. And Marcus, she waited. Go see them before you leave. Go down the hall and look through that glass and see your boss's sons. She said it without heat. You don't have to do anything, just look. She heard him not move for a moment. Then she heard him walk away. She didn't know if he looked. She didn't turn to check. Silas arrived at 8:03, and she told him about the 9:30 meeting in 45 seconds while they walked toward her hospital room so she could change and make herself presentable in whatever way was possible for a woman who had given birth 27 hours ago and had not slept. He listened. He said he would be there. She asked him to bring the 3 specific documents from the briefcase that she indicated, and he nodded without writing it down, which told her he had known what she would need before she asked. She changed. It took longer than it should have, and hurt more than she let herself acknowledge out loud. She found in the bag someone had brought from the house. Caruso had arranged it. She noted, which was its kind of data point about the complicated loyalties at work, a clean blouse and her dark blazer and her own shoes, which she put on and immediately regretted because her feet were still swollen from the pregnancy. She put them back off. She wore the hospital socks and the blazer and decided that anyone who wanted to use her footwear as evidence of instability was welcome to try. She was back on the NICU floor by 8:53 to check on the boys and speak with Dr. Okafor, who had returned for the morning handoff. He told her third son's overnight readings had been the most stable since admission. He told her carefully and precisely what this did and did not mean. She listened to all of it. She asked 4 questions, all of them the right questions, and she could tell by the slight change in his expression that he had been expecting the wrong questions and had been prepared for a conversation he now didn't need to have, Mael. At 9:28, she wheeled herself back in the chair because the walk to the third-floor conference room would have been too much into the elevator. Silas walked beside her. She had the 3 documents in her lap and her phone in her blazer pocket and the particular focused quiet of a woman who had spent the last 24 hours being stripped of every comfort and convenience and protection she'd taken for granted, and had in that stripping discovered that what remained was more than she'd known was there. The conference room was beige and had a long table and 8 chairs and a whiteboard with old marker residue that hadn't been cleaned completely. Dante was already there. So it was a man she didn't know, 50s gray suit, the specific posture of a senior litigation attorney who was being paid enough to be here at 9:30 in the morning without complaint. A woman sat beside him with a legal pad and a pen and the expression of someone whose job was to write down everything and form no opinions. Dante stood when she came in, the reflex of a man who had been raised with certain manners and maintained them regardless of circumstance. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. She had loved him. That was the complicated, inconvenient, inarguable truth of it. She had loved him with the specific eyes-open love of a woman who knew exactly who she was loving and had chosen to do it anyway. The version of him she had loved was in there somewhere, not the dominant one, apparently, not the one that showed up in the end, but present enough to have made 5 years feel like a life and not a mistake. She filed that away. It had no place in this room. Meline, he said. Dante, she said. She moved to the opposite side of the table, and Silas took the chair beside her, and they sat down, and the litigation attorney introduced himself as Leonard Hale and said he was there to facilitate a productive conversation, and she thought he actually said facilitate. Let's skip the facilitation, she said. What do you want? Dante looked at Hale briefly. Hale gave a small nod. Dante looked back at Meline. I want to resolve this cleanly, he said. The petition stands, but the terms are negotiable. What terms? Primary custody goes to me. You have generous visitation weekly, overnight once they're medically stable, full holidays alternating. You retain the house on Lakeshore. You receive a settlement, that is. He glanced at Hale. Substantial, Hale offered. Substantial. And the medical coverage for the boys continues under my plan, fully funded, no interruption. He paused. I'm not trying to cut you out, Meline.
I'm trying to make this orderly.
She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had not gone into the NICU. The man who had been in a parking structure with Vivian Cross while their sons were upstairs on oxygen. The man who had arranged a photographer at 4:40 in the morning, in the dark, in the rain, outside the emergency entrance where his wife was arriving alone in labor. You arranged for someone to photograph me arriving at the ER, she said. Something crossed his face. Gone fast, but she caught it. It was before the birth. You had planned for the photographs before the birth. She kept her voice completely even, which means you filed the divorce papers before I went into labor. You had them ready. Meline, when did you file them? She asked it the way you ask something when you already know the answer and you need the other person to hear themselves say it. Patricia already has the timestamps. I'm asking you when. Leonard Hale put his hand on the table. I don't think this line of mine. 3 weeks ago, Dante said. The room was very quiet. Silas did not move. The note-taking woman stopped writing. Leonard Hale looked at his client with the expression of a man who had advised against saying that and was watching his advice be ignored in real time. 3 weeks ago, Meline said. The situation with the business had... 3 weeks ago, I was 8 months pregnant with your sons. You filed divorce papers and arranged media coverage and prepared a custody motion while I was sleeping in your house. She said each piece of it separately, with space between them, so that each one landed as its own thing. What else did you prepare? This is a productive approach, Hale said. I'm not interested in productive, she said without looking at him. She was looking at Dante. I want to know what else. Dante leaned back slightly, the posture of a man returning to familiar ground. The business reasons were legitimate. The Rowan assets. You knew, she said. He stopped. You knew about the Rowan Syndicate, she said. You knew before you married me. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. It had texture. It had the weight of something that had been carefully kept back for a long time, finally reaching the open air. His jaw moved. He was deciding something. She watched him decide. I knew there were assets, he said carefully. I didn't know the structure. But you knew I had them. A pause. I knew your father was not what he appeared. And you married me anyway. I married you because controlling me was easier than fighting me. She said it without rage. Just as fact. If I was your wife, whatever I had was adjacent to what you had. And if you ever needed to separate me from it, you could do it on your terms. She looked at him steadily. That's the answer, isn't it? That's the honest version. Dante looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. It was not guilt. She didn't think guilt was something he experienced in the conventional sense. It was something closer to the expression of a man encountering unexpected resistance in something he had assumed was settled, almost professional in its quality, almost impressed. You're not as unprepared for this as I thought you were, he said. No, she agreed, I'm not. The inheritance changes the picture significantly, Leonard Hale said, attempting to regain the thread. Our clients would be open to reconsidering the asset division in light of. There is no asset division, Meline said. The Rowan assets were never marital property. They were held in trust outside the marriage, and they transferred to me personally. Your clients have no claim to them. Hale's expression shifted by a fraction. That's a determination a court would need to. Patricia Gaines filed documentation at 8:45 this morning, establishing the trust structure and the transfer timeline. The assets have never intersected with marital accounts. She paused. But that's not actually the interesting part, Mr. Hale. She looked at Dante. The interesting part, she said, is what we found when we started auditing the holding companies. Something changed in Dante's face. It was the first genuinely uncontrolled thing she had seen from him since he walked through her hospital room door yesterday morning. A rapid, involuntary change, the kind that happens before the control catches up. She placed the first document on the table. Alderman Construction, she said. Rowan Syndicate holds a 41% stake. Your organization used aldermen to front 4 city contracts over the past 6 years. The contracts were obtained through a bidding process that Silas's team has documented as Stop. Dante's voice was flat. The control was back, but it was working harder now. Fraudulent, she finished. The documentation includes correspondence between your project director and 2 members of the city contracts board. We have the emails. Where did you get my father? She said simply. He kept everything. He was an accountant. It's what accountants do. Leonard Hale was writing something. Fast. The note-taking woman had put her pen down, which Meline registered as interesting. You're making a significant mistake, Hale said. Probably, she said. I make them. Everyone does. She placed the second document on the table. Meridian Property Group. Rowan holds 37%. Meridian has been used to launder proceeds from. She looked at Silas. 3 sources, Silas said quietly. 2 domestic, 1 international. This is not a conversation I'm having without my full legal team present, Dante said. He pushed back from the table. The chair scraped. His face was controlled, and his hands were flat on the table, and she could see, in the rigidity of his shoulders, the specific tension of a man who is holding something with effort. Sit down, Dante. She said it quietly. He didn't sit. But he didn't move toward the door either. There's one more, she said. She placed the third document. This one was different. She watched his eyes go to it, watched the recognition move across his face, and beneath the recognition something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. The biological, autonomic response of a person encountering something they had believed was safely buried. Where did you get that? He said, not loud, very, very quiet. It came to me last night, she said, through a channel I'm not going to identify. She looked at him directly. Do you want me to read it aloud, Or do you want to tell me what it says? Hale was reaching for the document. She put her hand on it. Not aggressively, just placed it there. This is a private conversation, she said to Hale. Between me and my husband. She looked at Dante. Tell me what it says. The room held its breath. Dante sat back down, slowly. The movement of a man who was not surrendering, but was buying time, which was its own form of information. It's a medical record, he said. Whose? A pause. Mine. A genetic screening, she said, from 4 years ago. Before I was pregnant. She kept her voice neutral because she needed it neutral, because what she had read in that document the night before had done something to her that she was not ready to name in this room or anywhere else yet. A hereditary condition. Cardiopulmonary. Carried on the paternal side. She paused. Present in your family's history for at least 2 generations. The note-taking woman had left the room. Meline had not seen her go. Dante. Her voice came out lower than she intended. Our sons are in the NICU right now. The smallest one is at risk for a pulmonary collapse. And you knew, before I was pregnant, before I conceived those boys, you knew there was a hereditary condition that could affect their lungs, and you did not tell me. The probability was he stopped. What was the probability? The screening showed a 30% transmission rate. In most cases, it presents as a 30% chance that our sons would have this condition. She said it very quietly. And you said nothing. It wasn't he pressed his mouth closed. Opened it again, the business timing. If we had disclosed it during the pregnancy, the insurance situation. Stop. She put her hand up again. This time she was shaking slightly, and she did not try to control it because there was no point. Stop explaining it in terms of business. Meline, you let me carry those boys for 34 weeks without knowing. Her voice didn't break. She didn't let it. But something in it changed a quality that came from somewhere so deep and so genuine that it had nothing to do with the conference room or the documents or the strategy she had spent the night building. It was just a woman who had been failed by someone she had trusted with the most fundamental possible thing. One of them might need surgery. One of them is fighting to breathe. And you knew. You knew and you calculated, and you decided the business timing was more important than giving me the information I needed to take care of them. Dante looked at her. His face was doing something she had never seen it do. Not remorse, she genuinely did not know if he had access to remorse. Something more primitive. Something that looked for just a moment like a person confronting the full dimensions of a thing they have done and finding the dimensions larger than they had estimated. I thought the probability was he stopped himself. Say it, she said. I thought the probability was manageable, he said. The word landed in the room and did not leave. Manageable. Silas was absolutely still beside her. Even the air in the room seemed to have stopped moving. She looked at her husband, the man who had filed divorce papers while she was sleeping, had arranged photographers in the dark, had known for 4 years that his sons might be born with compromised lungs, and had said nothing, calculated the odds, determined the outcome was manageable, and she understood, with the finality of understanding that comes after a very long delay, exactly who she had married. Not the man on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. Not the man who had looked at her on certain nights like she was the only solid thing. Those were real, but they were not the whole person. The whole person had just used the word manageable about the hereditary medical condition of his unborn sons. She gathered the 3 documents. She stood up. Her body protested loudly. She stood anyway. My attorneys will be in contact with yours, she said. About the custody petition. About the account freeze. About the financial fraud documentation, which we'll be submitting to the relevant federal agencies this afternoon. She paused. And about this. She gestured at the 3rd document, now back in her hand. His concealment of a known hereditary condition affecting the children's health is relevant to every proceeding going forward. Everyone. Leonard Hale said something. She didn't process it. She looked at Dante one more time. I'm going back upstairs, she said, to see my sons. She walked out. In the hallway outside the conference room door, she stopped. Put one hand against the wall. Breathed. The incision was a sharp complaint across her midsection. Her legs were unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with surgery. Silas appeared beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there. You all right, he said. No, she said. Let's go. They moved toward the elevator. She had made it 8 steps when her phone rang. Patricia Gaines, she answered. The account freeze, Patricia said, and her voice had something in it, a quality that Meline hadn't heard from Patricia yet, in the 20 hours they had known each other. Something tight and urgent. The judge ruled, and he denied our motion. A beat. He upheld the freeze. Meline stopped walking. On what basis? He cited pending determination of marital asset claims. He's treating the Rowan transfer as potentially contestable until a full hearing. Patricia's voice was controlled but barely. Meline, this is the same judge who approved the NICU restriction last night. This is not coincidental. No, she said. She started walking again, slowly. How do we fight it? We appeal. But that's not the immediate problem. A pause. The immediate problem is that without access to your accounts, your ability to pay for private legal representations. Patricia, she said it quietly, are you telling me you can't continue? A long pause, the kind that has its own answer. I'm telling you that the financial structure of this representation becomes complicated if… Tell me a number, Meline said. Tell me what you need to continue through the end of the week. Patricia told her it was not a small number. Meline looked at Silas. The Rowan asset, she said to him, with the phone still at her ear. The transfer, is any of it liquid? Anything accessible before the formal. There's a discretionary fund, Silas said immediately. Your father established it for exactly this contingency. Administrative and legal expenses incurred during the activation period. He had his phone out already. I can have a transfer authorized within the hour. She put the phone back to her ear. Patricia, can you hold for 1 hour? Yes, then hold. She ended the call. They reached the elevator. She pressed the button. The door opened. Inside, going up, she stood with the 3 documents against her chest and her hospital socks on her feet and her blazer that was slightly too large because she'd lost weight in the last trimester in ways she hadn't noticed at the time, and she thought about manageable. The word sitting in her chest like something swallowed wrong. The elevator opened on the 4th floor. She stepped out and immediately knew something was wrong. Not by sound, by movement, the quality of activity near the NICU entrance, the clustering of staff that had a different energy from the ordinary flow of the floor. Dr. Okafor was in the hallway outside the NICU door, speaking to Dr. Singh, both of them with the body language of people making fast decisions. She moved toward them faster than her body wanted it to allow. Okafor saw her and came to meet her. He didn't make her walk the full distance. He came to her, which told her everything about the urgency before he opened his mouth. The 3rd boy, he said. 20 minutes ago, his readings deteriorated significantly. We're seeing confirmed signs of pneumothorax. The left lung has partially collapsed. He spoke quickly and directly. The way she had come to understand was his version of respect. We need to perform a needle thoracentesis immediately to release the trapped air. If we don't, the pressure will continue building and compromise his heart. She heard every word. She processed every word. She also felt the floor do something strange beneath her feet, the physical sensation of a person whose body has reached the edge of what shock can absorb and is reconsidering its options. If you do it, she said, what are his chances? With intervention, approximately 60 to 65% of survival to stable condition. His lung development is significantly compromised. He paused. Without intervention, he will not survive the next few hours. Then do it, she said. I need your signature on the consent form. Give it to me. He gave it to her. She signed it. Her hand was not steady. It didn't matter. He took it back. He moved toward the NICU door. He stopped and turned back. There's something else, he said. He said it in the way of someone who has been holding a secondary piece of information because the primary information required attention first. When we ran the updated blood work this morning as part of the workup for the pulmonary situation, we flagged something. A genetic marker in all 3 boys. It's consistent with a hereditary cardiopulmonary condition, he said, carried paternally. We'd need to run the father's blood work to confirm the transmission source, but the presentation in the boys is… He stopped. He looked at her face. He read something in it. You knew, he said softly. Not accusatory, just reading the truth. I found out this morning, she said, that their father knew before I was pregnant. Okafor was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that a person holds when they are encountering information that changes the shape of a situation they thought they already understood. This will be relevant to their long-term care, he said carefully. And to the legal proceedings, I would imagine. Yes, she said. It will be. He went back inside. She moved to the glass. First son, oxygen supplemented, but breathing. Second son, phototherapy, feeding tube, vital signs holding. Third son, the team was already moving around the smallest incubator with the specific, urgent economy of people who have very little time and know exactly what they're doing. She could see the equipment being assembled. She could see Dr. Okafor pulling on gloves. She put her hand against the glass. Behind her, she heard the elevator open. 2 sets of footsteps. She did not turn. Then a voice she had not expected. Not Dante, not Caruso. Vivian Cross said, "Meline?" She turned. Vivian was standing 10 feet away. She was not dressed the way she had been yesterday. The polished media professional presentation was gone. She was in a coat that looked like she had grabbed it fast, her hair pulled back with visible haste, and her face had something on it that Meline had not anticipated and did not immediately know how to read. "I need to talk to you," Vivian said. "I'm a little occupied," Meline said. "I know." Vivian looked at the NICU glass. Something in her expression shifted when she looked at it. "I know you are. This won't take long." She glanced at Silas. Then back at Meline. Alone. Silas looked at Meline. She looked at Vivian and made the calculation in about 2 seconds. The coat, the expression, the fact that she was here, on this floor, without Dante, without the journalist she'd been attached to yesterday. Something had shifted. "Silas," she said, "give us a minute." He moved to the end of the hallway. Vivian came 3 steps closer and then stopped, as if she needed the distance to say what she'd come to say. "He doesn't know I'm here," she said. "Okay," Meline said. "What I told that journalist yesterday, the story I was building," she stopped. Her jaw was tight. "I need you to know that I didn't know about the medical record. About the genetic screening." She met Meline's eyes. "I didn't know he knew before the pregnancy." "But you knew about the divorce papers," Meline said. 3 weeks ago. You knew." A pause, "Yes. And the photographer." Vivian's chin dropped slightly. "I arranged the photographer." "Yes." The honesty of it was almost startling. Meline had expected deflection and was getting confession, which was either a trap or something else entirely, and she needed to figure out which in the next 30 seconds. "Why are you here, Vivian?" Vivian looked at the glass again, at the smallest incubator, at the team working around it. "Because I saw the document," she said, "the genetic screening. He left it on his desk and I wasn't trying to see it. Her voice was controlled but effortful. "He knew. He's known for 4 years that this was a possibility, and he didn't tell you, and those boys are—" She stopped. "Say what you came to say," Meline said. Vivian looked back at her. Her eyes were red at the edges in a way that she was visibly not giving in to, and Meline recognized that specific quality, the determination not to cry, in front of someone who has more right to cry than you do. "I have documentation," Vivian said, "on the alderman contracts, on the judge, both judges, on the financial structure." She paused. "I've been his PR director for 4 years. I have everything. Emails, call logs, meeting notes." Another pause longer. "I was going to use them differently. I was going to use them to protect myself if he ever—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter what I was going to do. I'm telling you what I'm doing now." Meline studied her. "You're offering me the documentation," she said. "Yes." "In exchange for what?" Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," she said. And when Meline's expression didn't change, "I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. Coming from me, after yesterday." She didn't look away. "I'm not asking you to believe I'm a good person. I'm not." Something in her voice flattened to its most basic register. "But I am asking you to believe that I can still recognize when something has gone far enough." In the NICU behind the glass, the team worked. 3 tiny boys. One of them with a collapsed lung. All 3 of them with a genetic condition their father had known about for 4 years and had decided was manageable. Meline looked at Vivian Cross, the woman who had been her husband's mistress, who had arranged the photographer at 4:40 in the morning, who had fed stories to journalists in a hospital corridor, and she made a decision that she would revisit many times later and never fully resolve. "Send everything to Silas Whitmore," she said. "Tonight. Before midnight." She held Vivian's gaze. "And then get yourself a very good attorney. Because when this opens up, it's going to open all the way, and you were inside it." Vivian nodded once. She looked at the glass one more time. Whatever she was looking for there, Meline could not tell. Then she left. The elevator opened and closed. Silas returned to her side without being called. He had heard enough, she assumed, and the briefcase was already in his hand. She turned back to the glass. The procedure had begun. She could see the delicate, terrible precision of it, Doctor. Okafor's movements, the equipment, the monitoring systems, all trained on a body small enough to hold in one hand. The smallest son, the last one born. The one who had been bagged twice in the first minute of his life and had kept going anyway. Her phone rang, unknown number, the same one as last night. She answered it, a man's voice, not old, not young. "Careful, Meline," he said. She had not heard that voice in 11 years. She had last heard it at a family dinner, the November before her parents' accident, when she was 23 and he was 26, and they had argued about something completely insignificant that she could no longer remember and had not known it would be the last time she spoke to her brother. "Julian," she said, a silence on the line, the kind that contains 11 years. "I'm in Chicago," he said. "I've been here since this morning." A pause. "I saw what he did, Meline. I saw all of it." His voice had changed from the one she remembered. It had the same quality as Silas's, the same discipline over something that ran very deep. But beneath the discipline, she could hear something cracking at its edges. "Tell me what you need." She looked through the glass at her 3 sons. She thought about Dante's word, manageable. She thought about Patricia's frozen accounts, and the compromised judge and the journalists, and the 4 years of a genetic secret, and Vivian's photographs and the divorce paper filed 3 weeks before the birth. She thought about Protocol Orion and what Silas had said it would do to Dante's business infrastructure, and how much of that infrastructure Dante had not yet understood was already gone. She thought about her father, writing 5 careful pages 9 years ago, trusting that she would reach this moment and be ready for it. Her brother was waiting on the other end of the line. Behind the glass, the team worked, and the monitors held, and the smallest boy fought on with the specific stubborn persistence of someone who has decided, for reasons entirely his own, that this is not the moment to stop. "I need you to come to the 4th floor," she said. "This is a work of complete cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary." Meline Row was not what she had expected. She didn't know exactly what she had expected, some version of the 26-year-old she remembered, maybe updated and aged forward in her imagination, the way you age forward people you've lost. But the man who stepped off the elevator onto the 4th floor was someone she would not have recognized on the street. 37 now, broader through the shoulders than she remembered. The same darks, the same line of the jaw, but everything else rearranged by 11 years of living as someone else in a city their father hadn't named. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. Neither of them moved for a moment that had no clean edges, it just existed, compressed and enormous, the way certain moments do when you have been carrying their absence for so long that the arrival of the thing itself doesn't feel real at first. He crossed the hallway in 4 steps and put his arms around her, and she let him, which was not something she did easily or often, and she felt the specific, disorienting relief of a woman who had been holding herself together by deliberate force for 36 hours and had just been given for 30 seconds permission to lean. She did not cry. She was too depleted for tears, but she pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed, and he held on, and Silas stood 6 feet away and looked at the ceiling. Then she straightened up, pulled back, looked at her brother's face. "You look terrible," she said. "You look worse," he said. "I had emergency surgery yesterday morning." "I know." His voice roughened at the edges of those 2 words. He looked at the NICU glass. "How are they?" she told him. "All 3 current status?" The procedure that was still in progress on the 3rd one. She watched his face as she talked, watched him absorb it with the same practiced containment she recognized from the letter's description of him. He moved carefully. He processed before he reacted. The opposite of her, their father had said. She was beginning to see it. Dante said when she finished, "Yes, the genetic screening. He's known for 4 years." Julian's jaw tightened. She watched the containment work harder for a moment. "Where is he now?" "Somewhere in the building." "He left the meeting 40 minutes ago." She paused. "Julian, right now I need you focused on what's happening in that room." She gestured at the NICU. "And on what's coming in the next few hours. Can you do that?" He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted the recognition of someone encountering a version of their sibling they haven't seen before, updated in ways that the years and the distance have made possible. "What do you need?" he said. She told him. Dr. Okafor came out of the NICU at 10:47. He walked toward her with the steady, purposeful pace of someone whose news is not the worst it could be, but is not clean either. And she braced for it standing upright. She had given the wheelchair to a nurse, who needed it with Julian on her left and Silas on her right. "The procedure is complete," Okafor said. "We successfully decompressed the left lung. The immediate crisis is resolved." He paused. "He's stable. For now, the lung is re-expanding. We'll monitor the next 4 to 6 hours very closely." She exhaled. Her whole chest dropped. "The longer-term picture," she said, "is complicated." He said it without softening it, which she appreciated. "The genetic marker we've identified affects lung tissue development. In his case, given his size, his gestational age, the circumstances of the delivery, the implications for ongoing respiratory health are significant. He will likely need additional interventions as he develops. Possibly surgical, possibly prolonged respiratory support." A pause. "We need to convene a specialist team. Pulmonology, genetics, neonatology. This week. Set it up," she said. "Whatever you need, whoever you need, set it up. The financial authorization for is being handled," Silas said from beside her. Quietly. "Absolutely certain." Okafor nodded. He looked at Meline for a moment longer, the look of a physician who sees the whole of a situation and respects what he's seeing. Then he went back inside. Julian put his hand briefly on her shoulder. She reached up and pressed it once, and then let go and turned back to the practical situation, because the practical situation was still moving, and she could not afford to stop with it. Patricia called at 11:03. "I need you to know what's happening," Patricia said. Her voice had the quality of someone delivering intelligence in real time. "Dante's legal team has filed 3 motions in the last 90 minutes. The first contests the Rowan asset transfer on grounds that the holding structure intersected with marital finances. The second requests an emergency psychological evaluation of you citing post-surgical impairment and what they're calling erratic decision-making since admission." Meline's eyes went flat. "And the third, Patricia said, is a motion to appoint a temporary guardian for the children's medical decisions pending custody determination. They're arguing that the conflicting treatment philosophies between you and Dante create a medical risk to the boys. They want to take my ability to authorize their care," Meline said. "That's what the motion amounts to. Yes. The genetic concealment. I'm including it in our counterfiling." "But Meline," they got in front of the same judge again. "Motion is already under review." Julian was watching her face. She looked at Silas. "How fast can you get the Vivian Cross documentation into Patricia's hands?" she said. "I'm waiting on her transmission now," Silas said. She said before midnight. "That's not fast enough." She looked at her phone. At the time. At the 3 motions stacking up on the other side of a courthouse with a compromised judge. "Call her. Tell her we need it within the hour or it doesn't serve the purpose." Silas stepped away and made the call. She looked at Julian. "The alderman documentation. The financial fraud. How solid is it?" "I've been managing those records for 3 years," Julian said. "It's airtight. Every contract, every correspondence, every payment routing." He paused. "Dad built it to be airtight. He anticipated exactly this. We need to get it to federal investigators, not local. Federal, the account freeze judge, and the NICU restriction judge are both compromised, and we can't trust the local bench. I have a contact at the FBI Financial Crimes Division," Julian said. "I've been in contact with them for 8 months. Background only until now." He pulled out his phone. "I can make the call today. Make it." He stepped to the far end of the hallway. Patricia was still on the line. "Meline, there's one more thing." "Say it." "The psychological evaluation motion, if it's granted before we can establish the genetic concealment as grounds for Dante's own fitness issues, the evaluator will be appointed by the court. The court right now means the compromised judge." A pause. "If that evaluation goes badly." "It won't," she said. "You've been awake for it won't," she said again. Not because she was certain. Because uncertainty was not something she could afford to voice right now. "What do I need to do to make it not go badly?" "Be in front of a different judge before they can schedule it," Patricia said. "I'm working on a venue transfer motion. It's aggressive. It'll make them angry." "Good," Meline said. "Make them angry." "An angry opponent makes mistakes." She paused. "That's what Dante said to me once about negotiating. I'm choosing to find it useful." A brief silence on Patricia's end that might, in a different context, have been a laugh. "Okay, I'll file within the hour." Meline ended the call. She stood in the hallway and ran the board in her head the way she had watched Dante do it at dinner parties years ago, when he thought no one was watching. The way a person organizes a complex situation into its components and sequences the responses. She had thought it was a skill particular to him. She was discovering it was also particular to her. Federal contact, Julian. Vivian documentation, Silas pending. Venue transfer, Patricia filing within the hour. Specialist team for the boys, Okafor coordinating. Genetic concealment counter-motion in progress. Count freeze appeal, active. She was managing 6 things simultaneously on 36 hours without sleep and 27 hours post-surgery, and she did not have the option to stop any of them. Her incision was a constant, specific pain that she had organized into background information. Her legs were unsteady. Her hands were cold. Her eyes felt like they were being held open with deliberate effort. She went to the NICU glass and stood there for 2 full minutes without looking at her phone or thinking about motions or judges or financial documentation. She just looked at her sons, the specific reality of them, the smallness, the wiring, the impossible fact of their existence after 34 weeks, and an emergency surgery, and a night that should have broken her, and hadn't. She was going to need everything she had left for what was coming. She was calculating what that was, and whether it was enough when the elevator opened and Dante walked out. He was not alone. Leonard Hale was beside him, and behind Hale were 2 men she didn't recognize, not attorneys, by their posture. The posture of men who were there to fill space and communicate volume through presence alone. It was a technique she had seen Dante use in business meetings. The deliberate physical weight of numbers. He stopped when he saw Julian. The stop was total, a full-body arrest of motion. The absolute, involuntary response of a man encountering something he had believed was impossible. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds before the control caught up. Recognition, disbelief, and something that looked briefly like genuine fear. Julian Row has been dead for 11 years, he said. His voice was flat and careful, and working very hard. Apparently not, Julian said. They looked at each other across the hallway. Meline watched Dante recalculate, watched him run the implications of Julian Row being alive through whatever system he used to assess threats, and come out the other side with a different picture than the one he'd walked in with. Julian alive meant the Rowan Syndicate had an active second heir. Julian alive meant 9 years of surveillance and documentation by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Julian alive meant Dante's understanding of his own position had just shifted in ways he couldn't fully see yet. "You've been watching," Dante said to Julian. "Not a question." "For a long time," Julian said. "How long since before your wedding?" Something moved through Dante's expression. He looked at Meline. She met his gaze and gave him nothing. "You knew," he said to her. "I found out yesterday," she said. "Same as everything else I found out yesterday." Leonard Hale put his hand on Dante's arm. A discreet, professional touch, the attorney redirecting his client from a conversation that was not serving them. Dante looked at him. Hale leaned in and said something close to his ear that Meline could not hear. Dante straightened. His composure came back to full operational capacity. She watched him do it and thought, even now, even here, even with Julian standing across the hallway and the federal documentation in motion and Protocol Orion already burning through his business infrastructure, even now, his first instinct was to compose himself and press forward. It was the thing she had once found compelling about him. The absolute refusal to be unseated. It was also going to make the next several hours genuinely dangerous. "I came up here to discuss the specialist team for the boys," Dante said. His voice was level, entirely businesslike. "I've identified a pulmonologist at Northwestern who—" "Dr. Okafor is coordinating the specialist team," Meline said. "I've already authorized it. I have parental rights." "You have parental rights under contest," she said. "An emotion currently in front of a judge that attempts to strip my authorization for medical decisions which I have documented and which Patricia Gaines is including in a counter-motion being filed within the hour." She paused. "You don't get to file a motion to take my medical authorization and then walk up here and make medical decisions. Pick one." Hale put his hand on Dante's arm again. More firmly this time, Dante looked at his attorney, then back at her. Something behind his eyes was working very fast. "The alderman documentation," he said. "Queter." The 2 men behind Hale had gone very still. "You said you had correspondence between my project director and the contracts board." "We do." That documentation was obtained through your father's surveillance operation. The legality of how it was obtained is a question for a federal court, Julian said from across the hallway, which is where it's going this afternoon. The two men behind Hale shifted their weight simultaneously. A small movement, the kind that communicates readiness without specifying for what. Dante looked at Julian, then at Meline, then at Silas, who had returned to her side with his phone in his hand and his expression giving nothing. "You're not going to win this," Dante said. His voice was low and entirely certain, and she recognized it as the voice he used when he had already decided something was true regardless of what the evidence in front of him suggested. "You're post-surgical, you're running on nothing, you have a frozen account and a legal strategy built on a 9-year-old dead man's paperwork. You're in a hospital." He let that sit for a moment. "I have 3 motions in front of a judge right now. By end of day, your access to those children is going to be limited in ways that..." "Stop." She said it quietly. He stopped. "I'm going to say something to you," she said, "and I need you to hear it clearly because I'm only going to say it once." He waited. "You filed divorce papers 3 weeks before our sons were born. You arranged for photographers. You concealed a genetic condition that is currently affecting our 3rd son's ability to breathe. You have bought 2 judges, filed 3 bad faith motions in the last 2 hours, and you are standing in a hallway outside the NICU where your sons are fighting for their lives, trying to use legal process to get between me and them." She said each thing in some flat, unwavering tone, like laying down tools on a table. "And you just told me I'm not going to win." "That's correct," he said. "Protocol Orion activated last night at 7:12, she said. "By now, 3 of the 11 businesses whose controlling interest transferred to me have already received notification of the ownership change. 2 of them are companies you personally guaranteed to your lenders as wholly your own. The lenders were CC'd on the notification." She watched his face. "Your chief financial officer has been on the phone with Leonard Hale's office for the last 40 minutes. That's why Leonard is here and not at the courthouse. That's what he whispered to you 2 minutes ago." Hale's expression didn't change. But it didn't not change either. "By end of business today," she continued, "the remaining 8 businesses will receive the same notification. The federal filing that Julian is making in approximately 20 minutes includes documentation of the alderman fraud, the meridian laundering structure, and the judicial influence on both the account freeze and the NICU restriction. That filing will be made to the FBI Financial Crimes Division and copied to the U.S. Attorney's Office." She paused. "And Vivian Cross is transmitting 4 years of internal documentation emails, call logs, meeting notes to my attorney within the hour. She's also retained her own counsel." Complete silence in the hallway. The 2 men behind Hale were not moving. Dante's face was controlled. Completely, absolutely controlled. But she could see something happening behind it, the specific internal process of a man who has had the terrain of a battle he thought he was winning change under his feet in real time. "You can file your motion," she said. "You can try the compromise judge again. You can fight every piece of this in court and drag it out for months and make it expensive and exhausting and use every instrument you have to make my life harder than it already is." She looked at him steadily. "But you need to understand something, Dante. You needed me to be powerless. For everything you built in the last 3 weeks required me to have nothing. And I don't have nothing. I never had nothing. You just didn't look carefully enough." He stared at her. She stared back. "My sons are in that room," she said. "I'm going to be here when they come out. I'm going to be here tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. And whatever you decide to do next, that is not going to change." The hallway was absolutely still. Then Leonard Hale said, carefully and with the professional neutrality of a man who had just recalculated his own position, "Perhaps we should take a brief recess from my—" "We're done," Dante said. Not to Meline. He said it looking directly at her. 2 words, stripped of the legal maneuvering and the strategy and the controlled composure. Just those 2 words, and something in his voice that she couldn't fully name, not defeat, not quite, but the first hairline crack in the absolute certainty that had always been his most impenetrable quality. Then he turned and walked back to the elevator. Hale followed. The 2 men followed. The elevator doors closed. Julian came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either, for a moment. Her legs were shaking slightly, not from fear, she thought, but from the sheer physical demand of standing for that long, after what her body had been through. She reached out and gripped the handrail along the wall without looking at it. That was Julian started. Not over, she said. None of that is over. He's going to regroup and he's going to find another angle. She straightened up from the rail. Make the federal call. He made it. She went back to the NICU glass. The next 4 hours were the kind of 4 hours that don't exist in clean narratives. They existed in phone calls and documents, and 2 visits from Dr. Okafor with updates that were neither good nor bad but in between, which is its own kind of sustained terror. They existed in a conversation with Aline Park in New York, who walked Silas through the final notification protocol for the remaining 8 businesses. They existed in a text from Patricia that said venue transfer filed, expect pushback within the hour, and then 40 minutes later, pushback received, arguing now. They existed in Vivian's documentation, arriving in a compressed file at 12:53 that Silas opened on his laptop at the end of the hallway, scanning with the focused efficiency of a man who knew what he was looking for, and the expression on his face when he looked up told her it was everything she had been told it would be, and possibly more. At 2:17, the compromised judge ruled on the psychological evaluation motion. Granted, the evaluation to be conducted within 48 hours, evaluator appointed by the court. Patricia called before Meline had finished reading the text notification. I know, she said before Patricia spoke. What do we do? We need the venue transfer to come through before the evaluator is appointed. If we're in front of a different judge before the appointment is finalized, we can challenge the evaluator selection. Patricia's voice had the quality of someone who had been running on professional momentum for 14 hours and was discovering reserves she didn't know she had. I'm pushing hard. But Meline, the 48-hour window is tight. What do I do in the evaluation if it happens before the transfer comes through? Be exactly who you are, Patricia said. You're a post-surgical mother of 3 premature infants who has been making sound, documented, medically appropriate decisions for her children under extreme circumstances. That is what the record shows. Let it show that. She ended the call. Julian returned from his federal call with his phone still in his hand, and an expression that contained something she hadn't seen on his face, since he arrived something that was not quite satisfaction, because neither of them was built for satisfaction yet, but was the recognition of a door opening. They've been watching Dante's organization for 14 months, he said. Independent of us. The alderman documentation connects directly to 2 cases they couldn't close because they were missing the contract board correspondence. He paused. They want a meeting today, where, here, they'll come to the hospital. She processed this. The meeting needs to happen somewhere that isn't the 4th floor. I'm not leaving this floor. 3rd floor conference room, he said. The same one where she looked at the time. Set it for 4 o'clock. That gives you time to prepare the documentation package and gives Silas time to coordinate with Patricia on what we share and what we hold. Julian nodded. He started moving. At 3:04, Dr. Okafor appeared. His face was different from the last 3 times. More compressed. She read it before he spoke and felt her heart rate spike in a way that was immediate and physical. The 3rd boy, she said. His left lung has re-expanded as expected, Okafor said. That's stable. A pause. The right lung is now showing concerning readings. She pressed the heel of her hand against the glass. Hard. Bilateral. We're monitoring closely. It may stabilize. But if the right lung follows the same progression, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Another procedure, she said. Possibly. Or we look at more aggressive respiratory support options. I've been on the phone with the pulmonologist at Northwestern Dante's office, reached out to them separately, which I need you to know. His office contacted the pulmonologist directly? Her voice went flat. Yes. I was made aware 20 minutes ago. They had a conversation about the boy's treatment options without your knowledge or authorization. The anger that moved through her was clean and absolute. He went around me. I flagged it with hospital administration, Okafor said. And I've made clear to the Northwestern team that treatment decisions are authorized through you. But Meline, he said her name with the specificity of someone making a deliberate choice to use it. This is what he's building. A pattern of parallel engagement with the medical team. If he can establish that he's been actively involved in medical discussions, he's creating the appearance of participation, she said, without ever having been in the room. Yes, she looked through the glass. 3rd son. Right lung now, both. What do you need from me right now for him, she said. A decision. If the right lung deteriorates to the same point as the left, and I want to be honest with you about the probability. Tell me the probability. Given the bilateral presentation of the genetic marker and his current lung tissue development, the probability of needing intervention on the right side within the next 24 hours is approximately 70%. He said it directly. Cleanly, the way she had come to trust he would say hard things. If and when we reach that point, there's a conventional approach, the same procedure we performed this morning, and there's an experimental protocol being used at 2 centers in the country, including ours. The experimental protocol involves a surfactant therapy combined with pressure management that has shown significantly better long-term outcomes in cases with this specific genetic presentation. A pause. It's riskier in the short term. The conventional procedure is safer today. The experimental protocol gives him a better chance at functional lung capacity over the next 5 years. She absorbed that. What would Dante choose, she said. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Based on the conversation his office had with Northwestern, the conventional procedure. She nodded. Of course, the safe option, the manageable option. The option that reduced short-term liability and did not require gambling on an outcome that wasn't guaranteed. She looked at her 3 pounds 3 ounces. First day and a half of life. Already through one procedure that his father had never seen, in a room his father had never entered, because his father was in parking structures and conference rooms and lawyers' offices building a case for why someone else should make decisions about this child. If I authorize the experimental protocol, she said, and it goes wrong, it will be used as evidence of poor decision-making, Okafor said. He said it without apology because she needed the truth and not a managed version of it. I want you to understand that clearly. And if I authorize the conventional procedure and his long-term lung function is significantly impaired, minuscence, that will be the result most likely. Yes. She stood there. The hallway was quiet around her. Silas somewhere to her left. The muffled sounds of the hospital doing what hospitals do. The small visible chest of her third son rising and falling through the glass. This was the thing Dante had not understood and could not understand, because understanding it required a particular kind of being that he was not. There was no manageable here. There was no calculation that reduced this to an acceptable risk profile. There was only her son, and the question of who she was going to be in this moment, and the fact that every choice she made from here forward was going to be used by someone as evidence of something. She thought about what her father had written. You have always moved like you are running out of time. I do not say this as criticism. She thought about manageable. I want to speak with the specialist running the experimental protocol, she said. Today, within the next 2 hours. I want to understand exactly what the risks look like and what the data shows. She paused. And then I'm going to make the decision. I'll arrange it, Okafor said. One more thing. She looked at him directly. If Dante's office contacts any member of the medical team again, without my authorization, any member, any team, any conversation I need to know within the hour. Not at the end of the day. Within the hour. Understood, he said. He went back inside. She turned toward the elevator. The FBI agents arrived at the 4th floor at 3:47, 13 minutes early, which told her something about their level of interest. 2 of them. A woman named Special Agent Torres, compact and precise, and a man named Reyes, whose handshake was brief and whose eyes moved through the floor with the specific quality of someone making an assessment they were already mostly finished with. Julian met them at the elevator. Meline came forward. Torres looked at her at the hospital gown visible under the blazer, at the IV that had been capped off but not removed, at the NICU floor they were standing on. She didn't comment on any of it. She simply said, "We appreciate you meeting with us given the circumstances." "I need to stay on this floor," Meline said. "The meeting can happen here or not at all." Torres looked at the hallway, at the chairs along the wall near the window at the far end, the chairs where Meline had spent the night. "That works," she said. They sat. The conversation that followed lasted 1 hour and 23 minutes and covered, in Torres's careful, methodical progression, the full scope of what the Rowan documentation contained and how it connected to the FBI's existing case structure. Torres asked questions that were specific and sequential. Reyes wrote. Julian answered the financial architecture questions with the precision of someone who had been managing the material for 3 years. Silas handled the legal structure of the asset documentation. Meline answered the questions about the marriage, about the timing, about the genetic screening, about the judges. She answered them plainly and without editorializing, and she watched Torres make notes with the expressions of an agent who is hearing things that are connecting dots that have been waiting for connection for a long time. At the 50-minute mark, Torres looked up from her notepad and said, "The judicial influence you have direct documentation, not inference. Direct. Vivian Cross's documentation includes payment records, communication logs, and a meeting record from 14 months ago," Silas said. One meeting between Dante Moredi's representative and each judge. The payments followed within 48 hours. Torres and Reyes exchanged a look. "We're going to need all of it," Torres said. "Today." "You'll have it within the hour," Silas said. At the 1 hour 15-minute mark, Meline's phone vibrated. Patricia. She glanced at the screen. Venue transfer granted. New judge assigned. Psychological evaluation appointment is being re-examined under new jurisdiction. She set the phone face down on her knee. She finished the question Torres was asking. When the agents left with Silas accompanying them to coordinate the documentation transfer, Julian stayed with her. They stood at the NICU glass side by side. He was looking at his nephews for the first time in full daylight, with time to actually see them. And she watched his face do the thing that faces do when they encounter something that makes the abstract real and the real immediate. "They're so small," he said. "Yes, they're fighters, though." He said it the way you say something when you need it to be true and believe it is, and are saying it out loud partly to reinforce both things. "Yes," she said. Her phone rang again. She looked at the screen and felt something in her stomach drop, not fear exactly, but the particular physical response of a person encountering a number they recognize and haven't prepared for. It was a number she had not seen in 3 years, a Chicago number. A name she hadn't spoken since a dinner table argument about something she no longer remembered. Not Julian, not Dante, not any of the attorneys or doctors or federal agents or anyone connected to the machinery of this day. Her mother-in-law, Rosa Moretti, Dante's mother. 71 years old, widow of the man who built the Moretti family operation, the person who had looked at Meline at their first dinner and said, quietly and with complete seriousness, "My son needs someone who can stand beside him without flinching. I hope that's you." Meline had not spoken to her in 3 years because Rosa had made it clear, when the marriage started to fracture in ways that became visible, that her loyalty was to her son and always had been. She answered anyway. "Rosa," she said, a pause on the line. The specific pause of a woman who has prepared what she is going to say and is making herself say it. "I know what he did," Rosa said. Her voice was 80 years of Chicago winters, and a life lived inside a world of difficult men and harder choices. "The medical record I found out this morning." Another pause. "I knew his father had the condition. I didn't know Dante had been tested. I didn't know he knew." Her voice did something at the edges. "I didn't know he chose not to tell you." Meline was very still. "Why are you calling me, Rosa?" "Because those are my grandsons," the old woman said. "Because whatever Dante has decided about this marriage, and whatever I think about how you've handled certain things, those boys are my blood, and they are in a hospital. And he is in a lawyer's office." And that is, her voice broke cleanly and precisely, the break of someone who has held it long enough and has chosen this moment to stop. "That is not acceptable to me." Meline looked through the glass. "What are you offering?" she said. "My testimony," Rosa said. "Whatever you need. I know things about those business contracts. About those judges I know more than anyone has ever asked me, because nobody ever thought to ask the old woman." A breath. "I know when the genetic testing happened. I was there. I drove him to the clinic. I didn't know what the results said until this morning, but I know the date and the clinic and I can put him there." The hallway was completely silent around Meline. Julian was staring at her. She thought about the judges and the FBI and Vivian Cross and Protocol Orion and Patricia's venue transfer and the experimental protocol that her son might need within the next 24 hours. She thought about Dante's word, manageable. She thought about her father's words, "Nothing is not the same as zero." "I'll have Silas contact you within the hour," she said. "Good," Rosa said. And then, a pause that had the weight of a woman who has spent 71 years inside a story that was never entirely hers. "Take care of those boys." "I am," Meline said. "I will." She ended the call. She stood at the glass for a moment. Her legs were at the absolute edge of what they would do without the chair. Her incision was no longer background noise. Her eyes had the dry, scraped quality of eyes that have been open for 38 hours and are registering this as a personal grievance. But the board in her head was different now. Federal case, active, documentation transferred. Venue transfer granted. Psychological evaluation under re-examination. Rosa Moretti, new witness, entering the record. Vivian Cross documentation in Patricia's hands. Protocol Orion burning through 11 businesses. The boys stable, watched, alive. And somewhere on another floor of this building or in a car heading downtown or in Leonard Hale's conference room, Dante Moretti was running his own board. He was still in the game. He was still moving pieces. He had resources she hadn't identified and angles she hadn't seen yet, and the absolute refusal to be unseated that had always been his most dangerous quality. He was not done. She was not done either. Dr. Okafor appeared in the NICU doorway. He looked at her. "The specialist is ready," he said. "He can speak with you now." About the protocol. A pause. "The right lung readings have changed in the last 20 minutes. She straightened up from the glass. Her whole body objected. She stood straight anyway. "I'm coming," she said. And inside the NICU behind the glass, 3 small heartbeats continued unsteady, determined, fighting the particular fight of people who have just arrived in a world that is not making things easy for them, in a hallway where their mother is still standing, and where the battle for everything that comes next is still, with everything it has, being waged. This is a work of complete cinematic fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are entirely imaginary. The specialist's name was Dr. Marcus Webb, and he had been working with the experimental surfactant protocol for 4 years, and he spoke to Meline from a tablet screen that Okafor held at the NICU doorway because she could not go in yet, and Webb could not come out. He was direct. She appreciated direct. The protocol worked by introducing a synthetic surfactant compound directly into the lung tissue in combination with precisely calibrated oscillating pressure support. In infants with the specific genetic marker her sons carried, the conventional procedure addressed the immediate crisis, but left the underlying tissue development unsupported, meaning the lung could recollapse within weeks, could develop scarring that would affect respiratory function for years, could require repeated interventions that each carried their own compounding risks. The experimental protocol addressed the tissue development simultaneously with the acute crisis. Short-term, the intervention was more invasive, and the monitoring requirements were intensive. The failure rate in the first 12 hours was higher. But the 12-month outcome data showed lung function preservation at nearly double the rate of the conventional approach. She listened to every word. She asked 4 questions. Webb answered all 4 without hedging, which was the right thing to do. Then she said, "If this were your son, what would you choose?" Webb was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that a person holds when they've been asked to stop being a physician for 30 seconds and be a human being instead. "The protocol," he said, without hesitation. "But I want you to understand what the first 12 hours look like. It will be hard to watch." "I've been watching hard things since yesterday morning," she said. "Authorize the protocol. I'll sign whatever you need." She signed. Okafor took the forms inside. She stood at the glass and watched the team begin the preparation, and she did not look away, and her legs held, and she did not ask for the wheelchair, because she had made this decision standing up, and she was going to stay standing up until her son was through it. Julian brought her coffee from somewhere. She didn't ask where. It was bad coffee and it was hot, and she drank half of it, and it kept her upright, and that was what it needed to do. At 6:43 in the evening, the protocol began. At 6:44, her phone rang. It was Leonard Hale. She almost didn't answer, she answered. "My client would like to discuss a settlement," Hale said. His voice had changed from the conferences room this morning. The professional smoothness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted the quality of a man whose case has changed shape in ways he is still calculating. "My attorneys handle settlement discussions," she said. "This is a direct conversation my client requested." He believes, "Have your client call Patricia Gaines," she said. "I'm busy," she ended the call. Julian, beside her, said nothing. At 7:15, Patricia called. She had spoken with Hale. The settlement offer included full primary custody to Meline, Dante retaining visitation rights under a structured supervised arrangement pending investigation, withdrawal of all 3 pending motions, and a financial package that Patricia described as significant, and that Meline did not ask the number for. He's withdrawing the motions, Meline said. All three Patricia confirmed, including the guardian motion and the psychological evaluation. Why? A pause. Rosa Moretti submitted a sworn statement to my office at 6 o'clock. Her testimony about the genetic testing, combined with the federal filing and the Vivian Cross documentation, has apparently... Patricia stopped. Chose her words. His attorneys have advised him that proceeding is no longer in his interest. Meline looked through the NICU glass. The team was working around the smallest incubator with focused, precise attention. Webb's protocol. Hard to watch exactly as promised. What are the custody terms specifically, she said. Patricia walked her through them. Supervised visitation for Dante, bi-weekly, in a neutral location, pending the outcome of the federal investigation and the judicial misconduct proceedings. If the investigation resulted in criminal charges which Torres had indicated privately was the likely outcome, the visitation terms would be subject to additional court review. Medical decision authority remained solely with Meline until further order of the new judge, who had been assigned that afternoon, and who had no relationship with Dante's organization that anyone had been able to identify. The boy's medical costs, Meline said, long-term coverage, fully funded through a separate trust. He's proposing, and this is his attorney's language, an irrevocable medical trust for each child, funded at a level that covers anticipated care through age 18, including specialist support. I want it through 25, Meline said. The genetic condition has implications past 18. I want that covered. A pause. I'll push for it. Don't push. Require it. That's the condition. Okay, Patricia said. Give me an hour. She gave her an hour. She spent that hour at the glass. The protocol was exactly what Webb had described. The monitors spiked and steadied and spiked again, and she watched the team respond each time with the efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this and were not frightened by the numbers because they understood what the numbers meant. She did not always understand what the numbers meant. She understood enough, she stayed. At 8:02, Okafor came out. She searched his face before he spoke. He's through the acute phase, Okafor said. The right lung is responding. Webb is calling it a stable response. He looked at her with the specific expression of a physician delivering news that is genuinely good and is making sure the person receiving it understands it is genuine. Both lungs are now supported. He's not clear it's going to be a long road, but he's through the worst of tonight. She put her hand flat against the glass. Behind it, the smallest boy breathed. Both lungs. Compromised, supported, medicated, monitored, but breathing. She became aware that she was crying only because Julian's hand was on her shoulder, and his voice, low and close, was saying her name in the way of someone trying to get through to a person who has gone somewhere internal. She came back. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She breathed. Okay, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. Okay, sit down, Julian said. Not a suggestion. She sat. He brought the wheelchair without asking, and she got into it without arguing, which told both of them how close to the edge she had been running. She sat in the wheelchair with her hands in her lap and her father's letter in her blazer pocket and the coffee cup that had gone cold 2 hours ago on the floor beside her, and she let the information settle into her body the way information settles when you have been holding your breath against the worst possibility, and the possibility has, for tonight, stepped back. Patricia called at 9:20 with the counter response from Hale. Medical coverage through age 25 granted. The full settlement was committed to paper. But Patricia read the key terms aloud slowly, and Meline listened to all of them. Do I sign tonight, she said. You can sign tomorrow. The motions are already withdrawn. The new judge has the file. Tonight you rest, Patricia. I mean it. There is nothing that requires your signature in the next 12 hours that cannot wait until morning. Your job right now is to be on that floor when those boys need you. A pause, and the professional composure softened by a fraction. You've been remarkable today, Meline. I need you to know I understand what it cost. Meline was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. For everything. Get some sleep, Patricia said, and was gone. She did not get sleep, not yet. But she allowed Julian to get her food, real food, from somewhere outside the hospital, because he had always been the one who understood that the body's requirements do not pause for dramatic circumstances, and she ate it in the wheelchair outside the NICU, and it was the first real meal she had eaten since before the birth. And her body received it with something close to gratitude. Silas returned at 10:15 from coordinating the documentation transfer with Torres. He reported that the FBI had opened a formal investigation and that the judicial misconduct referral had been submitted to the appropriate oversight body. The two compromised judges had been notified that they were under review and had, within an hour of notification, recused themselves from all Moretti-adjacent cases. The broader investigation into the Alderman fraud and the Meridian laundering structure was expected to move quickly given the completeness of the documentation. She listened to all of it. Then she asked him to go home. He looked at her. "Silas," she said, "you're 62 years old and you've been carrying my father's briefcase for 9 years waiting for this day. Go to a hotel. Sleep. Come back tomorrow." Something moved across his face that was not quite amusement and not quite emotion, but was in the neighborhood of both. "Your father said you would be impossible to work for," he said. "He was right about most things," she said. "Good night." He went. Julian stayed. She didn't tell him to leave because she knew he wouldn't, and because, honestly, she didn't want him to. They sat in the hallway together with the particular companionship of people who share blood a history and have found each other again on the other side of something large, and for a while neither of them talked, which was the right thing. Then Julian said, "Do you remember what you told me the last time we argued, before the accident?" She thought about it. "Something about you being impossible. You said I was always so careful that I'd never actually do anything." He said it without resentment, just as a fact he'd been carrying. "You said careful was just another word for afraid." She looked at him. "I was 23. You weren't wrong, though." He looked at the floor. "That's why Dad sent me away, not just because of the threat. Because I would have hidden anyway. He just made it official." A pause. "I watched you today. You're not careful. I'm aware. I mean it as a compliment." He looked up. "You make me want to be less careful." She thought about that. "I make you want to sign consent forms for experimental medical protocols at 6 in the evening?" "Something like that," he said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost, which was more than she'd expected to get to today. They sat with that. At midnight, she asked the night nurse if she could go in. To the NICU, to see them. The nurse, a different one, from Beatrice, a younger man named Dario, who had the kind of quiet competence that made you feel the floor was solid, checked with the team, and came back and said yes, briefly, with a mask and gloves. "Don't touch anything except what they tell you. Stay near the door if you feel unsteady." She went in. The NICU at midnight had a different quality from the NICU during the day, quieter, more concentrated, the medical sound somehow both more audible and less alarming in the reduced light. The team on duty moved with the calm authority of people for whom this was simply the work, this particular vigil, this particular tending. She went to First Son's incubator. He was 4 pounds 1 ounce and had been in the world for 19 hours, and he looked through the incubator glass and the supplemental oxygen and the monitoring wires like a person who was entirely himself already something in the line of his mouth that she recognized without being able to name what she recognized it from. She put her gloved hand through the small access port, touched his hand. His fingers were the size of her fingernail. He didn't wake. His chest rose and fell with the stubborn steadiness of someone who has decided to keep doing this and is not particularly interested in any alternative. She moved to Second Son. The jaundice lamp gave his incubator a blue-white light that made the whole space look like something underwater. He was 3 pounds 12 ounces and had the particular concentrated expression of a person who is enthusiastically seriously, as if sleep itself requires effort and he is giving it full attention. She touched his hand too, the same small fingers. Then she moved to Third Son. She stood his incubator for a long time, both lungs breathing. The protocol working through his system, the monitors showing the numbers that Webb had told her to expect, the numbers that were not good but were sustainable and would, over the next days and weeks, be worked on by people who knew what they were doing. He was 3 pounds 3 ounces and had been through more in his first 20 hours of life than most people encounter in years. And he was here and his chest was moving, and the monitors were doing what monitors should do. She put her hand through the port. His fingers closed around her index finger with a reflexive grip that was automatic and involuntary and completely, irreversibly real. She stood there with her hand in the incubator and her son's fingers around hers, and she felt the full weight of the last 20 hours arrive in her chest all at once, not as collapse, not as breakdown, but as the specific, enormous gravity of a woman who has been in motion for so long that stillness itself becomes a kind of shock. Everything she had done, everything it had cost, everything that was still to come, because nothing about this was truly finished, and she knew the investigation would take months and the legal proceedings would stretch, and the boy's medical needs were long-term, and the marriage end would have chapters she hadn't read yet. She knew all of that. But right now, in this room, it was midnight, and her son's fingers were around hers, and both his lungs were breathing. And for 30 seconds, she let herself be only that. Only this, only here. She went back out to the hallway at 12:20. Dario had chairs waiting, and Julian was standing, and she told him to sit down, and he told her to sit down, and they both sat down, which was the right outcome. At 2 in the morning, Meline's phone lit up with a text from a number she had seen only once before. Not Torres, not Hale, not Rosa, Dante. She looked at the text for a long time before she opened it. When she did, it was 4 sentences. The settlement is being finalized. I won't contest the terms. I know what the boys need, and I know it isn't a legal battle. A pause, she could feel the pause in the construction of the sentences, the place where he had stopped and started again. I know I'm not the person you believed I was. I don't think you're who I believed you were either. I think that's the honest version. She stared at it. She thought about the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, 11 years ago, a man sitting beside a woman who had a nightmare, not making her feel small for it. The honest version of that had also existed. She had not invented it. She did not respond to the text. She set the phone face down and looked at the ceiling and thought about what it means to love someone who is not the full person you believed they were, and what it means to grieve that even when you are the one who has won. Because she had won, in the ways that the word applied to situations like this one, she had kept her sons. She exposed the fraud. She had dismantled the legal traps and the financial manipulation and the media operation and the whole careful architecture of Dante's certainty that she was powerless. She had done all of that, and it did not feel like the movies. It felt like a woman in a wheelchair in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning with a surgical incision and a dead phone battery, and 3 sons on the other side of the glass who would need her to be functional tomorrow and the day after and every day after that, and a brother sleeping in the chair beside her who had been a ghost for 11 years, and a father's letter in her pocket that she still hadn't finished reading. She pulled out the letter. She read the last page. Her father wrote, I have made many decisions in my life that I believed were right and discovered later were only necessary. There is a difference. Necessary things keep you alive. Right things are what you build when you survive the necessary ones. I spent 20 years building something to keep you safe. I hope it was enough. I hope you are angry with me for the parts where it wasn't. That anger is your right, but I also hope, when the anger settles, that you find in what I left you not just protection but permission. Permission to be the full size of who you are. You were always larger than you allowed yourself to be inside that house, inside that marriage, inside the smallness of a life lived in someone else's shadow. I am sorry I was not there to see you become this. I believe you will be extraordinary. I have always believed that. Your mother believed it first. She read it twice, folded it, put it back in her pocket. Julian stirred in the chair beside her. Not awake, just shifting, the way people shift in hospital chairs, because hospital chairs are not designed for sleeping, and the body registers this continuously. She looked at his face in the half-dark of the hallway and thought, 11 years. She had been alone for 11 years in the way that you are alone when the person who knew you before you became who you are is gone. And he had been alone in a different city under a different name, watching through channels their father had built, waiting for a moment neither of them had chosen. They were both, in their own ways, exactly where their father had known they would end up. She thought he was an accountant who built a financial empire and anticipated the future of his children with a precision that was either love or obsession or both. She thought, I am going to spend a long time being angry at him for not telling me sooner. She thought, I am also going to spend a long time being grateful for what he left. Both things were true at the same time, and she was tired enough and honest enough to let them be. Torres called at 7:43 the next morning. Meline had not slept. She had moved in and out of a drifting half-consciousness in the chair that was not sleep, but was rest of a kind. And she had been awake fully since 6 when the day staff came on, and Okafor arrived and told her the overnight readings on all 3 boys had been the most stable since admission. All 3 stable. She had sat with that for an hour before Torres called. "We executed search warrants this morning," Torres said. "Moretti's downtown office and the Lakeshore property." A pause. "He was at the office. He cooperated. His attorneys were present." Another pause, shorter. "He's been taken in for questioning. He has not been charged yet. That's a decision for the U.S. attorney, but I want you to know the timeline is moving." "Thank you for telling me," she said. "The judicial misconduct proceedings are being handled separately," Torres continued. "Both judges have retained criminal defense counsel, which tells you something." She said it without inflection. "The Alderman Contractors board members are cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced exposure." "The documentation from your father's files," she stopped. "It was meticulous. It was the most complete financial documentation I've seen in 14 years in this unit." "He was a very good accountant," Meline said. A pause on Torres's end that contained something that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent. "He was," she agreed. The call ended. She sat with the morning coming through the window at the end of the hallway, Chicago in August, the light coming hard and flat off the lake, the kind of morning that doesn't apologize for being bright. She had not seen daylight and she calculated 38 hours. It looked like a foreign country from the hospital window. She thought about going outside. She thought about the boys. She thought about the settlement documents that Patricia was bringing at 10 for her signature. She thought about a conversation she had not yet had and needed to have before the day moved further. She asked Julian, when he woke at 8, to make sure Silas was coming. Then she asked him to go get breakfast for both of them, real breakfast, from somewhere with eggs, and to take his time. He looked at her. Understood, because he was her brother and understanding without explanation had always, even with 11 years of absence, been the nature of them. He went. She called Rosa Moretti. The old woman answered on the second ring the way she always had. Rosa Moretti was a woman who picked up the phone because ignoring a call was, in her view, a kind of cowardice. "I heard," Rosa said before Meline could speak. "They went to the office this morning." Yes, a long silence. The silence of a mother whose son is being questioned by federal agents. A woman who built her life inside a world she had not chosen and had made herself at home in it anyway, because the alternative was a life without the people she loved. "He made his choices," Rosa said finally. Her voice was rough and flat and entirely certain. "I raised him. I know what I taught him, and I know what he chose to do with it. Those are different things." "Rosa, I'm not asking you to feel sorry for him." "I know. I'm asking you." The old woman stopped. Started again. "Those boys are my grandsons. Whatever happens with Dante. Whatever happens with the courts and the investigations and all of it. Those boys are my blood." Meline thought about what that meant and what it would cost and what it was right to do, and she was quiet for a moment because the question deserved the quiet. "When they're stable enough for visitors," she said, "I'll let you know." Rosa was quiet. "That's more than I expected," she said finally. "I know," Meline said. "Don't make me regret it. I won't." And then, because she was Rosa Moretti and directness was the only language she had ever spoken, "You're stronger than he understood." "I knew that from the first dinner. I hoped it would be enough." A pause. It was. She ended the call. Patricia arrived at 10 with the settlement documents. They sat in the third-floor conference room, the same beige room, the same table, the whiteboard with the old marker residue, and Patricia walked her through every page. Meline read every word. She was not a woman who signed things without reading them. Not anymore, not ever again. The medical trust terms were there, through age 25, irrevocable, fully funded, each child. The custody terms, the supervised visitation structure. The withdrawal of all motions. She signed. Her hand was steady. Patricia gathered the documents. She looked at Meline across the table, with the expression of a woman who has seen many things in her career and has learned to recognize when something is different from the ordinary. "What happens now?" Meline said. "Now the legal machinery runs," Patricia said. "The federal investigation, the custody formalization, the financial proceedings. It runs for months." She paused. "You need to be prepared for it to be slow and grinding and unglamorous." "That's fine," Meline said. "Slow and grinding I can handle." It's the fast and catastrophic that wore me out. Patricia almost smiled. Get some sleep, she said. Real sleep. The kind where you're not in a hospital chair. When the boys are more stable. When the boys are more stable, Patricia agreed, which was the right answer. 3 weeks later, the smallest boy came off respiratory support. Not entirely, he would need monitoring for months, would need the specialist team's attention, would carry the genetic marker his father had known about and not disclosed for the rest of his life. But he came off the primary support and his lungs held, and when Meline put her hand through the incubator port that morning, he gripped her finger with a grip that was, and she was not imagining this. She was certain she was not imagining this stronger than before. She said, I know. You're telling me you've got it. He did not respond because he was 3 weeks old and 3 pounds 9 ounces, and response was not yet in his repertoire. But he held on. 6 weeks after the birth, first son was transferred out of the NICU to the step-down unit. 7 weeks, second son followed. Third son, her smallest, her fighter, the one who had been bagged twice in the first minute of his life, came out of the NICU 9 weeks after his birth. Transferred to step down on a Tuesday morning that was cold and gray and entirely unremarkable, and that Meline would remember for the rest of her life in the precise, physical detail of a woman who understands that the ordinary and the extraordinary are not always different things. She was there when they wheeled his incubator through the door. Julian was there, Silas was there, Okafor was there, off duty in regular clothes, because he had said when she thanked him that he would like to see this particular one through if she didn't mind. She didn't mind. She stood in the step-down unit hallway and watched her 3 sons, all in the same room for the first time, and felt the specific silence of a thing that has been fought for so hard and for so long that its arrival is almost quiet. The formal investigation into Dante Moretti's organization resulted 4 months later in a 6-count federal indictment. The 2 judges lost their seats on the bench and faced separate criminal proceedings. Marcus Caruso cooperated with investigators. Leonard Hale withdrew from the case and was eventually disbarred in an adjacent proceeding. Vivian Cross testified for the prosecution and received a reduced sentence for her own role in the media operation. Dante Moretti did not testify. He maintained through his new attorneys a consistent and complete silence, which was the last version of control available to him, and the one he exercised with full commitment. Meline did not follow the trial closely. She followed it the way you follow weather, aware of its movement, prepared for what it brought, but not spending her days inside it. She had a financial empire to learn and 3 sons to raise, and a brother who was, slowly and carefully, and with the particular caution of a man relearning how to be present, finding his way back into a life that was not under a different name. She moved out of the Lakeshore house. She found a place smaller, older, in a neighborhood where the trees were large and the sidewalks were cracked and nobody knew her name yet. The boys came home, one by one, over the course of a month, each homecoming its own event, its own specific arrival. She had learned from Okafor and Webb and the step-down nurses how to read their monitors, how to recognize the signs that required attention versus the signs that required only watching. She was not good at this immediately. She learned. Julian helped. He was better than her at the overnight shifts, which she admitted without particular grace, and he never commented on it, which she appreciated. Silas came by twice a week with documents that required her attention. There were always documents. She had come to understand that the Rowan Syndicate was not a trophy or a revelation, it was a responsibility, daily and detailed and unglamorous, the kind of work that her father had done for 30 years inside the cover of an ordinary life. She was learning the shape of it. She made mistakes. She asked questions. She hired people who knew more than she did in the areas where she knew less, which was most areas, and she let them do their work while she learned. She did not think of it as power. She thought of it as the particular weight of a thing you have been given and have agreed to carry. Dr. Adrian Vale, who had been in the chaos of the first days, almost a footnote in her processing of Silas and Julian and Protocol Orion, appeared at the hospital 3 weeks after the birth, at Silas's request, to review the medical documentation related to the genetic concealment for the federal case. He was a forensic medical consultant, a specialist in cases where medical information had been withheld in legal contexts. He had known her father. He had delivered the sealed letter because her father had trusted him to deliver it at the right moment. He was not a dramatic person. He was careful and precise and had the qualities she had come to associate with people her father had chosen to trust, a kind of quiet reliability that did not announce itself. He came back twice more for documentation purposes. The third time, he came with the documentation finished and stayed an hour past when he needed to. They talked about her father, about the cases he'd built his consultancy on, about the boys, whose medical history he now knew in some detail from the files, and asked about with the genuine interest of someone who was not performing interest. She noticed this. She filed it. She had too much else happening to do more than file it, but she noticed. The settlement's supervised visitation terms came into effect 4 months after the birth, when the federal proceedings were underway and the terms had been reviewed and approved by the new judge. Dante's first authorized visit was on a Wednesday morning. She was not there for it. That was the agreement. The visits happened at a neutral facility with a court-appointed obstetrician, and Meline's presence was not required and was not, she had decided, healthy for any of the people involved. She dropped the boys off in the lobby. She left. She drove to a coffee shop 6 blocks away and sat for 90 minutes with a cup of something that was not terrible and her father's complete financial documentation, which she was working through section by section, and she did not think about what was happening in the facility. Or she tried not to. When she picked them up, all three, in 3 separate carriers, the logistics of which remained genuinely challenging, and would for some time she looked at their faces for information the way she had learned to read the monitors. First son was asleep, second son was also asleep. Third son was awake and looking at the ceiling of the car with the particular concentrated attention he brought to all ceilings, which was something she had decided was a personality trait and not a medical concern. She drove home. She did not know what Dante had said to them, or whether he had held them, or what his face had done when he looked at them. She did not know whether the version of him that had sat on a kitchen floor at 2 a.m. had shown up for that visit, or the version in the tailored suit who placed papers on a hospital bed. She did not know and had decided she could not afford to know, because knowing would cost her something she needed for other things. What she knew was this: they were her sons, and they were in her car, and they were going home. On the night before the boy's 4-month birthday, a Friday, the kind of evening in late autumn when the city smells like cold, and the light goes early and the radiators come in old buildings with a knock and a hiss, Meline sat on the floor of the living room of the smaller, older house with all 3 boys on a blanket in front of her. She had been trying to figure out names for 4 months. She had tried various approaches, she had lists, Julian had opinions. Silas had once, with the absolute deadpan of a man who had waited 9 years to make a single joke, suggested she name them after financial instruments, and she had told him to go home, and he had, laughing quietly to himself, the only time she'd seen him laugh. She looked at her sons on the blanket. First son was looking at her with the serious, assessing look he'd had since the NICU, the one that made her feel she was being evaluated. She had decided his name was Edmund, her father's middle name. Ed, eventually. She had decided this 3 weeks ago and had been waiting to be sure, and she was sure. Second son was attempting, with great concentration and no particular success, to roll over. He had been attempting this for 2 weeks. He had not succeeded. He gave no indication of planning to stop trying. She had decided his name was Luca, which was her mother's father's name, and which had appeared to her one morning without prelude, the way the right names sometimes do. Third son was lying on his back, looking at the ceiling with the same focused attention he gave all ceilings. He was smaller than his brothers, and would probably always be smaller. He wore a small monitor patch on his chest that would come off eventually, Webb had told her, probably by 6 months. His lungs were developing. The protocol was working. He would need follow-up. He was working on it. She had not been able to name him. Every time she tried, it felt like she was settling for something, which was not acceptable. He had not settled for anything, not in the first minute of his life, not in the first day, not through 2 procedures and a genetic condition his father had decided was manageable. He was not in any way she had observed a person who settled. She looked at him. He stopped looking at the ceiling and looked at her instead. It was the first time he had done that, made deliberate eye contact, tracked her face, found her on purpose. 4 months old and 10 days, and he had decided tonight was the night to look at his mother. She felt it in her chest like a door opening. She thought about her father's letter. The last line of it, after the paragraph about being the full size of who you are, after the paragraph about her mother believing it first. He had written one more sentence, very short, at the very bottom of the last page, as if it had been added after everything else was already done. His name should be something that means he came through. She had not known what he meant when she read it. She had assumed it was general advice about the boys, a hope for them. Now, looking at her third son looking back at her, she understood her father had been specific. Calcium, she said out loud. The name settled into the room the way the right names do. Edmund and Luca and Callum. 3 boys who had arrived in the world fighting and were still, daily, with varying degrees of effort and success, fighting. Callum kept looking at her. She reached out and put her hand flat against his small chest. Felt his breathing against her palm. Both lungs. Working. Steady, Callum, she said again. That's you. He blinked. She sat on the floor of her living room in the house that was hers, with her sons on the blanket in front of her, and outside the radiators knocked, and the city did what cities do in the dark, and the investigation continued in its slow federal machinery, and the legal documents accumulated in Silas's briefcase. And Adrian Vale had said he would call sometime that week, and she had said that would be fine. And Julian was in the kitchen doing something with dishes that involved more noise than was strictly necessary, and none of it was finished. None of it would be finished for a long time. But this room, this blanket, these 3 faces, this was finished in the way that things are finished when they finally arrive where they were always going. She had been a woman who drove herself to a hospital at 4:40 in the morning, alone in the dark. She had been a woman who signed divorce papers left on a hospital bed beside her without a word about the sons in the next room. She had been a woman who was supposed to have nothing. She had been wrong about being that woman, because that woman had never been the whole story. The whole story was this: Edmund looking at her with his father's seriousness and his grandfather's eyes. Luca failing again to roll over and showing no signs whatsoever of caring. Callum with his hand around her finger and his 2 lungs breathing and his face turned toward hers. Meline Row, chairwoman of the Rowan Empire, mother of 3, daughter of a man who built invisible things so she could be safe, sister of a man who came back from 11 years of being gone, woman who had been placed on a hospital bed with papers beside her hand and had decided with everything she had not to sign. She sat with her sons in the quiet and let the whole of it, the cost, the grief, the anger, the love that was still there even for the things she had lost, the gratitude that complicated by everything it had taken to earn it. She let all of it exist with trying to organize it into something manageable. It was not manageable. It was her life. She kept her hand on Callum's chest until his breathing went deep and slow and certain, and then she sat in the quiet and let the night do what nights do, and she did not move for a long time, and she did not need to.